Chapter 654. His words caused Jean Wan's ears to heat up. Her shoulders and neck were covered in goosebumps from the water splashing over. She turned her face away to avoid him, but the man had already bent down. He patiently and gently placed his hand on the bite wound on her neck. She sat in the bathtub, unable to move because of his touch. She was afraid that if she moved, she would moan uncontrollably. Behind her was the edge of the bathtub, but in front of her was a pool of warm water. She couldn't tell if the force on her neck was light or painful, but at least when Immerse looked at the bite mark, he definitely wouldn't be in a good mood. When he bit you, you should have knocked him unconscious. Did you have to be injured to learn to be decisive? The man's voice was close to her ear, low and husky. Jean Wan ignored him and placed one hand on her bent knee. However, because of his touch, she couldn't help but curl up her fingers. At that time, there was only one ashtray in the entire room, but it was very far away. If there had been one by my hand from the beginning, the moment I opened my eyes and saw him, I would have taken action. As though he had heard a very satisfactory answer, the man moved his hand away from her neck and turned to hold the back of her head, turning her to look at him. Because of the drug, you lost control and had to run into the bathroom to take a cold shower. What were you thinking about? Jean Wan's heart instantly thumped hard. She wanted to shift her eyes away, but because of the man's hand on the back of her head, she couldn't. What was she thinking about? What else could she be thinking about? She had lived 2 lives, but he was the only man she had ever met. All the vivid images that popped up in her mind were of him pressing her down on the bed. When he finally appeared, she even suspected for a moment that she was hallucinating because of her desire. But what was there to be surprised about? At that time, if she had been thinking about another man, she would have been truly shocked. Besides, she was only thinking about it. Not only is your mouth stubborn, but your temper is also stubborn. Yet, I insist on shoving a hedgehog like you into my arms. Do you think I'm masochistic now? His tongue slowly moved from her cheek to the back of her ear, and then to her neck. His voice was low and husky. Even if you stab me every time I touch you, I still enjoy it. There are many ways to push you back into my arms. Even if it's just physical intimacy, at least when you're in trouble, your body is still honest. You know who you desire the most. How do you know that the person I was thinking of was you? There are millions of men in the world, and I've met many good men. The man chuckled in her ear, because I am your first man, and also your last man, and because I have the ability to make you not interested in other men. In this matter, you can only accept my intimacy, and only like me. Jean Wan was angered by his confidence and choked. CEOMO, your wishful thinking and your shamelessness are really getting better and better. He smiled lightly. I don't know about other things, but just now in the hotel bathroom, from the very beginning to the moment when you realized it was me who was holding you, the scene of you relaxing in an instant is very unforgettable. Mo Jingshan, I find that you're really shameless to the extreme. You're forcing me to fight with you, aren't you? In that situation, I was besieged on all sides. Compared with Sheng Yihan, of course, you're safer. I was instinctively, Before Jean Wan could finish her words, the hidden button on the back of her underwear was suddenly undone by the man. It was fine if it was undone. She was currently enduring the effects of the drug, and her body was extremely sensitive. The tightly pressed underwear suddenly loosened, and warm water flowed over her sensitive spot. In an instant, her entire body trembled, and her gaze became even more dazed. Instinctively what? As he spoke, he took her out of the water with his long arm and let her sit on the edge of the bathtub. As soon as her pink body came out of the water and came into contact with the coolness of the air, she immediately trembled again. Before she could react, the man's kiss fell on her. At the moment Jean Wan couldn't help but soften in his arms. She was instantly pressed against the nearest wall by the bathtub. The kiss was so deep that she forgot what she had just said. She clearly remembered what she wanted to say, but she almost melted into a puddle of water. Because Jean Wan's body was still wet, the man's home clothes were soaked because of this movement. The bathroom was steaming, and the soaked clothes clearly outlined the man's figure. But in the steamy space, there was only the temperature of each other and the entanglement of their breaths close to each other. Jean Wan could no longer sit steadily. Her back was against the wall, and she could only hold on to the man's clothes with both hands to prevent herself from falling to the side. All her reason had collapsed because of this kiss. However, just as she almost lost control and raised her hands to hold the man's shoulders tightly, she took the initiative to kiss him back, and even burrowed into his arms. The man suddenly stopped the kiss and then stepped back from her. Jean Wan's hand was holding on to the cloth on his shoulder, but because of his movement, her hand fell weakly to the side of her legs. Her reason, which was immersed in some kind of desire, burned her nerves. She opened her eyes, and her eyelashes were wet. She looked in confusion at the man who had just changed into his home clothes and was almost half soaked. "You, what are you doing?" He suddenly came to kiss her, evoking the strong desire she had suppressed with great difficulty, and then he let her go. Was it so interesting to watch her suffer? However, the man casually took down a towel and covered her head with it. As Jean Wan furrowed her brows and stared at him with red, longing eyes, he used the towel to dry her wet hair and then wiped the water off her body. Even as Jean Wan grew impatient from his actions, he remained exceptionally patient. She felt as if there were countless cat claws scratching at her flesh, especially when the towel was wiping her body. Every inch of her body was separated by the towel, and she could not feel the warmth of the man's palm. That desire and unwillingness almost tortured her to the point of insanity. Jean Wan could not take it anymore. She raised her arms and circled them around the man's neck. She raised her head to bite him, urgently and hoarsely saying, "Stop wiping." The man chuckled softly and huskily. "I've already taken a cold shower. Now I have to wipe myself clean so that I won't catch a cold." Chapter 655. Don't torture me anymore. If you want to do it, then do it. Mo Jingshan, hurry up. Jean Wan's voice was already tearing up. "I can't take it anymore." He lowered his head to kiss the corner of her lips, saying calmly, "It's been more than 3 hours since you were drugged. If you calm down for a while, the effects of the drug will wear off. Endure it a little longer, N." Jean Wan's hand gripped the clothes on his back tightly. "I can't." "Then do you want me? Or do you want me to go downstairs to the toy store to buy it for you?" Jean Wan directly wrapped her arms around his neck with force, raising her head to kiss him. Even her body was pressed tightly against his, presenting herself to him without the slightest gap. Even if she had gone crazy, she really couldn't control herself anymore. Mo Jingshan's eyes darkened to the extreme because of her actions. He casually tossed aside the towel he had placed on her to wipe her body, and his free hand directly lifted her up. He lowered his head and directly took the initiative to deepen the kiss. In the bathroom, they kissed until the sky darkened. Then Jean Wan was carried by him. She heard the man kick open the bathroom door and carry her into the bedroom while kissing her all the way. Mo Jingshan easily tore away the last barrier on her lower body. Then Jean Wan's back was empty, and she fell directly onto the bed. Then the man fell down with her in his arms, and the two of them fell into the center of the bed at the same time. The little woman whose body was burning hot could no longer hold it in. One of her hands was pressed against the bed, and the other was actively tearing at the man's body. The buttons on the man's home clothes were not tight, and they were even very loose under her hands. In just a few moments, she had undone several buttons. Jean Wan closed her eyes. She could not tell whether it was her own voice or the man's panting. However, as the kiss deepened, she unconsciously bent her legs. The man kissed along her chin to her neck, and inch by inch, her collarbone and the surrounding skin. The desire that was about to reach the top of her head made Jean Wan's entire body tremble uncontrollably under him. Her mouth made various sounds that she had never dared to make in her life. She was a little afraid of herself like this. Mo Jingshan, N. Do men like women like this in bed? Jean Wan covered her eyes with her hand, speaking hoarsely as though she had been wronged. The man chuckled and kissed her lips again. He smiled hoarsely and said, "I've seen what you look like. Do you really think you're calmer than you are now when you're not drugged and you're begging me to let you go?" Jean Wan, really? Really? Jean Wan instantly abandoned her image and followed her heart's desire to be entangled with the man. When Jean Wan's behavior became more and more out of control, Mo Jingshan smiled heavily, pecked her lips, and asked hoarsely, "So soon?" Of course, Jean Wan was very anxious. It would be strange if she wasn't anxious at this time. The man clearly kept igniting her body, but he still refused to satisfy her. She moved back and forth, twisted, and then stared at him as if she wanted his life. She grabbed his arm tightly and said, "Hurry up. You asked for it." The dinner party was held when the sky gradually darkened. Jean Wan had no idea which glass of wine she had drunk was problematic. However, from the time she drank those glasses of wine to the time she woke up in Xing Yihan's room, and now, it had been several hours. She had no idea how she had endured it. At least, when she was carried back to Aolan International, it was already past midnight. The early morning sun shone in through the windows of Aolan International, passing through the tiny gaps between the curtains. Outside the curtains was the most beautiful scenery of High City. The morning fog had not yet risen, and the warm sunlight passed through the fog and landed on the plain curtains. From late at night to early morning, the intermittent sounds in the master bedroom did not stop. The woman's panting and crying sounded as though she could no longer bear it, but it was so charming that he could not stop. To the man, it was even more stimulating than the drugged wine she had mistakenly drunk. The lights in the room were not turned on, and the only light came from the window. Mo Jingshan carried Jean Wan to the bathroom and showered her. He wrapped her in a bathrobe and sent her back to the bed. However, in the midst of her drowsiness, the woman grabbed his arm again and climbed onto his body without any hesitation. This repeated until noon. The two of them almost gave up on taking a shower. In the end, Jean Wan completely endured the effects of the drug. Her body was exhausted to the point of dispersing, and she fell into a deep sleep on the bed. In the evening, the sunset glow passed through the curtains. Jean Wan finally opened her eyes, but she had no strength at all. Every part of her body was sore to the point where she suspected that her body parts needed to be reassembled. Otherwise, she would most likely be crippled. Most importantly, Mo Jingshan, who rarely lazed in bed, was still by her side. What time was it now? If she remembered correctly, yesterday's dinner party was on the weekend, and today was Monday. She was just about to get up when the man sat up first. However, the moment she sat up, she fell back. Mo Jingshan reached out to catch her, lowering his head to place her back on the pillow. "After tossing and turning for so long, are you sure you can get off the bed now?" As he spoke, the man bent down to pick up the bathrobe on the ground. When the man got off the bed and tied the belt around the bathrobe, Jean Wan picked up the pillow he had just slept on and threw it at him. Her voice was hoarse as she said, "If I hadn't seen Xing Yihan yesterday, I would have suspected that you were the one who drugged me. From what I see, it's clear that you're the one who's unsatisfied and resorted to despicable methods to abduct me." Jean Wan said this deliberately. No matter how one looked at it, it sounded like she was venting her anger after calming down. However, it also sounded like she was acting coquettishly. Right now, her legs were so weak that she could barely get off the bed. However, the man was calm and composed as though he had only done a simple aerobic exercise. The disparity between their stamina was truly heart-wrenching. He glanced at her. "Who was the one who refused to let go after every round last night? Weren't you the one who kept burrowing into my embrace?" Jean Wan, she was speechless. Even if she was drugged, it wasn't because she drank too much. She clearly remembered everything that happened last night. Even if it was just a single moment, she could remember it clearly. Chapter 656. Jean Wan sat up with some difficulty. She grabbed the pillow under her and threw it at him. "It's one thing to cling on to you. You also know that I was irrational back then. But can't you be gentler? Mo Jingshan bent down. He was right in front of her eyes. The man's voice also became gentler and deeper because of this action. You used that lustful expression to burrow into my embrace, rubbing your legs against my body, and you still expect me to be gentler? Then you clearly know that I've been exhausted for a long time. You just have to give me a perfunctory answer. Is there a need for you to do it with your own body? Jean Wan raised her face and glared at him. You know what I mean. Mo Jingshan unhurriedly stated, how did I do that? Just hug and coax me a little, coax me to sleep. I'd probably be able to rest by now. You flirted around in my embrace until I was on fire. You want me to hug you to sleep? I can't do it. Jean Wan jumped up from the bed. In the end, the soreness between her legs tugged at her nerves. Her expression twisted, and she fell back onto the bed. The man chuckled softly. You don't remember how you spent last night? I really should get someone to study the drug that Ji Mengran drugged you with. There were several times when I felt sorry for you and slowed down. Because of that, you bit me unforgivingly. I wanted to let you go, but I can see that your ability to cling on to others is very impressive. Time and time again, after I've showered and decided to give up, you bring me back to bed. In this world, I'm afraid only a woman like you can do this. Jean Wan, she had already regained her rationality. She grabbed the blanket and wrapped it around her body, changing the topic. Last night, that person, that Xing Yihan, will he die? You wish for him to live? Jean Wan's expression turned colder. Indeed, he deserves to die, but I don't want to kill anyone. Back then, I had no choice but to smash him with the ashtray. Furthermore, he drank the drugged alcohol yesterday. If I don't knock him down, I'm afraid the situation will really go out of control. Mo Jingshan watched her. Regardless of whether I'm dead or alive, it won't land on your head. Jean Wan raised her head to look at him. You used to be indifferent to the Xing group and didn't care much about it. But now, what are you going to do? He smiled faintly. Today is Monday. I've spent the entire weekly meeting with the company's executives to sleep with you. Are you sure that the first thing you want to do after waking up is to discuss the man who bit your neck yesterday? Jean Wan felt that his smile was a little scary and immediately stopped mentioning Xing Yihan's name. However, she suddenly realized that it was already Monday afternoon, evening. Not only was Mo Jingshan absent from the company's senior management meeting on Mondays, but she was also absent from the company's senior management meeting on Monday. Her MN group also had a routine senior management meeting on Monday, and she was also absent. Jean Wan subconsciously rushed to look for her phone, only to recall that at the banquet yesterday, when she was taken away, her small bag seemed to have fallen onto the ground. My bag and phone, Shen Mu has already gone to deal with it last night. If he can find it in the banquet hall, he'll send it over to you tonight. Jean Wan relaxed but suddenly thought of something. She abruptly blurted out, Mo Jingshan, did you not take any precautions last night? Mo Jingshan immediately coldly glanced at her. Mrs. Mo, what precautions do you want me to take? Please take back the words Mrs. Mo. No matter how busy the company is, I'll definitely go to the Civil Affairs Bureau tomorrow to check, lest you take advantage of me verbally. Sure. As long as you want to check, I can accompany you anytime. The man leaned closer to her. As your husband, I've missed out on what I've missed out on, and what I've missed out on because I changed the course of your life. Even though it's been so long, in the eyes of the law, your name as Mrs. Mo has never changed. Not only should I enjoy the rights of your husband and fulfill the duties of a husband, but Mrs. Mo should also give me the identity of a child's father. Besides, I was tightly pestered by you last night. How could I possibly have the time to take precautions? As he spoke, his breath brushed against her skin, disturbing Jean Wan's thoughts. Jean Wan unnaturally turned her face away slightly. Your phone has been ringing in the living room for a long time. Aren't you going to pick it up? Shine Group's CEO suddenly disappeared for an entire day on Monday. There are bound to be a lot of things he needs to call you to deal with. Also, have Shenmu bring my bag back as soon as possible. I'm sure I'll have a lot of calls. After saying that, she covered her head with the quilt and laid her head back on the pillow. Have a good rest. After you wake up, take a bath to relax. I'll call someone to send dinner over before the sky turns dark. The man finished speaking and turned to leave the bedroom. Jinwan tugged the blanket off her head. She watched his back and recalled how she had been pestering him earlier. She felt flustered. However, looking at him now, she felt that from the moment she asked him if he had taken precautions, his entire being had turned cold. It was as though he was angry. Although her miscarriage in the United States 3 years ago was not a shadow in her heart, she had experienced so many things at that time. In addition, Su Shui had directly pushed her out of the car on the highway. In that situation, the child could not be saved. Mo Jingshan had also almost risked his life to save her. But now she was still uncertain about the situation of their marriage and feelings. In this situation, if she hadn't been drugged, she wouldn't have considered taking precautions. She just asked him, why was he angry? Jinwan turned over and covered her head with the blanket again. However, in the darkness of the blanket, she covered her forehead with her hand. Her mind kept replaying the intense and continuous entanglement on this bed, and her ears gradually turned hot. In the living room, it was Shenmu who called. CEOMO, Shingihan's life has been saved, but he hasn't woken up. That ashtray is very heavy. At that time, Miss G must have used a lot of strength to smash it in order to protect herself, but no one's life fell into her hands. At least, I can guarantee that her mood will not be affected. Shenmu said calmly, as for what happened last night, we've found enough evidence to catch the Shin Group and Ji Mengran's studio in one fell swoop. Mo Jingshan said indifferently, let's go through the legal process. Although we're going through the legal process, after all, it's all done in secret. The degree of violation that can be found on the surface is still too light. We can only put them in prison for a few years, but not enough to deprive them of their rights for life. Chapter 657. Jinwan stayed under the quilt and refused to go out. Even when it was time for dinner and Mo Jingshan came to ask her to eat, she just responded lazily and continued to sleep. When Mo Jingshan came over and was about to take her out of the quilt, she hurriedly wrapped herself in the quilt and rolled on the bed twice, saying that she would go down to eat right away. After dinner, she fell back onto the bed. She had to rely on sufficient rest and sleep to make up for the energy she had expended earlier. As for Mo Jingshan, she really doubted whether he was even human. He was the one who kept moving on the bed. She, who was under him, was so tired, yet he was completely fine. She really suspected that if she had more drugs and kept pestering him without a care for her life, would this man still be able to continue and completely squeeze out her last breath? At around 7:00 in the evening, Shenmu brought over the things Jinwan dropped in the banquet hall. He said that the hotel's cleaner had picked them up and handed them over to the hotel's security office. There was nothing missing in the bag. There was a password on her phone, so of course, it could not be easily opened. Jinwan checked and thanked Shenmu. Shenmu smiled but did not dare to glance at Jinwan. After all, Jinwan did not have her own clothes to wear in Aolan International. Right now, she was wearing Mo Jingshan's shirt. Although she was also wearing a pair of pants that had been rolled up countless times, the collar of the shirt was not high. The ambiguous marks on her neck were not covered. With one glance, he could tell what kind of intense battle had happened here yesterday. Yesterday, when Jinwan was carried out of the hotel by Mo Jingshan, he knew what had happened to her. However, it was up to them how they wanted to settle it. After all, he was an outsider, and it was not easy for him to guess. However, the visual impact of seeing it with his own eyes caused Shenmu to quickly look away. He did not dare to look at Jinwan. In fact, Jinwan had tried her best to shrink her neck, but no matter how hard she tried, the marks on her neck could not disappear. Furthermore, she did not find anything to cover them with. Of course, she knew the reason why Shenmu did not dare to look at her. It was fine if he did not look at her. If he did, she would only feel awkward. Cough, and this was indeed not Imo Jingshan's fault. It was she who pestered Imo Jingshan again and again. By the way, Miss Ji. Before Shenmu left, he said, Ji Mengran's whereabouts have been located. She's hiding in the Ji family's villa and won't come out. Tomorrow morning, the police will probably come to arrest her. Do you have anything else to say? Or is there anything else you want to do about Ji Mengran? There's nothing to explain. People who do wrong deserve to be punished. If I don't intervene, the police won't let her escape easily, right? Shenmu smiled. It could be heard that Jin Wan had guessed that CEO would not allow Ji Mengran to get away scot-free. This time, she had completely plucked the feathers off the tiger's head. Now that she had fallen into the tiger's mouth, she no longer had any excuse to escape. Indeed, even if Jin Wan didn't do anything, Ji Mengran would spend the rest of her life in prison. After a few years, it would be too easy for her to commit suicide due to mental problems. Of course, the Xing's group, one of the 4 largest families in High City that was about to be destroyed, would also accompany her. On Monday night, Mo Jingshan didn't go to the company during the day. At night, he had some electronic documents to deal with, so he went straight to the study. Jin Wan had told him that she wouldn't stay with him during dinner, but the man had no intention of asking someone to send her a set of clothes. She wanted to call him, but in fact, she felt tired even to raise her hand. If she went back to Yuehu Bay like this, she probably wouldn't be able to get up tomorrow. Anyway, he had work tonight and wouldn't be too much of an eyesore in front of her. Jin Wan curled up on the sofa and watched the news on her cell phone. When the man came out of the study, he saw Jin Wan leaning against the sofa with her cell phone by her hand and almost falling asleep. The little woman's head was tilted and the screen of her cell phone had been dark for a long time. He looked at her for a moment and strode toward her. When he was about to carry her back to the bedroom, Jin Wan suddenly opened her eyes when she heard his movement. She looked up at him as if she had just dreamed of something and suddenly thought of something. Her eyes were a little drowsy, but she suddenly asked, "The headquarters of Shine Group is in Los Angeles. You haven't returned to the United States for so long. Are you going to stay in High City in the future?" She remembered that he hadn't returned to High City for 10 years and had lived in the United States for 10 whole years. As soon as she finished speaking, the man put his cell phone aside so that it wouldn't touch her and was about to pick her up. Jin Wan hurriedly raised her hand to push his hand away. "I don't need you to carry me. I'm not disabled." Mo Jingshan chuckled. "Aren't your legs too weak to move?" Jin Wan slapped his hand away. "Anyway, I can do it myself. Don't always find excuses to carry me." The man who had been seen through chuckled. In the end, he did not continue to hug her, lest she continued to explode. "Have you finished your work?" Jin Wan glanced at the study and then at the time on her cell phone. "I still have some documents." "No hurry. I'll read them after I take a shower." With that, the man took another look at her. Seeing that she seemed to be very comfortable curled up on the sofa, he didn't ask her to go back to the bedroom. He picked up the cell phone on the coffee table and glanced at it again, then put it down and turned to enter the bathroom. The reason why he glanced at the cell phone was that a message had just come in. It seemed to be a string of English words, but Jin Wan didn't see it clearly. Seeing the man enter the bathroom, Jin Wan leaned against the sofa, glanced at the cell phone on the coffee table, and got up to pick it up. The cell phone had a password and couldn't be unlocked. Just as Jin Wan was about to try using the phone password he used 3 years ago, suddenly, a new message popped up on the screen. It was still in English. But this new message could be seen on the locked screen. It was sent by his secretary in the United States. The English translation was, "CEO, have you confirmed the date of your return to Los Angeles?" Jin Wan's eyes paused. "Back to Los Angeles?" Mo Jingshan came out of the shower and saw that Jin Wan was still sitting on the sofa. When he walked over, he saw that his cell phone was also in her hand. He took it and saw the message from his secretary and guessed that she must have seen it. What? You don't want me to leave? Jean Wan turned her eyes to the man who was looking down at her. With Shine, the United States is where you belong. Why are you staying in High City for so long? Chapter 658. Jean Wan, I'm not asking about that. I'm saying that when you're in High City, just for you. There's no other reason. Jean Wan pursed her lips. In truth, she did not know what she wanted to ask. She probably only wanted to know if he would spend most of his time in America or would he stay in High City. However, when the words reached her lips, she suddenly did not know how to ask. She did not seem to have a need to ask about such things. The scales in her heart had already begun to lose balance bit by bit. She lowered her head to pick up her phone, no longer looking at him. She casually said, "You can't be saying that I'm more important than Shine?" "You're indeed more important than Shine." She had only casually mentioned it, but the man's reply was straightforward. This time, Jean Wan was completely speechless. She raised her eyes to look at him. After thinking for a moment, she abruptly stood up and turned to leave. As she walked, she said, "Go do what you need to do. I'm going back to the bedroom to sleep." Mo Jingshan watched as Jean Wan headed back to the bedroom without looking back. He smiled mildly. "Sweet dreams, Mrs. Mo Jean Wan." Her footsteps quickened as she entered the bedroom. The little woman returned to the bedroom. Mo Jingshan picked up his phone again. Before the phone rang, he saw the caller ID displayed on the screen. He picked up the call and asked in an indifferent and businesslike tone, "What's the matter?" The next morning, Jean Wan received a call from the Ji family. It was from Auntie Chin. "Eldest miss, hurry back. Right now, the Ji family is about to be flipped upside down because of second Mississippi Director Ji's heart is aching from anger." Before the sun rose, the police car had already arrived at the Ji family. They said that they were going to take Second Miss away. Second Miss has been kneeling and begging Director Ji to save her, but it's clear that Director Ji is about to have a relapse from anger. Jean Wan directly rushed back to the Ji family. The moment she arrived at the courtyard of the Ji family's villa, she saw a police car parked outside. The police officer in charge of the area sat in the car. They had received orders from their superiors to detain Ji Mengran and take her away. However, the nearby police station had some relations with the Ji family. Thus, even if they had to take Ji Mengran away, they still gave Ji Hongwen face and gave the father and daughter some time to say their goodbyes. In the end, he didn't expect that Ji Mengran would use this time to kneel down and beg for mercy. Jean Wan walked in. Outside the villa, she could hear the sound of crying even through the door. She narrowed her eyes and recalled the scene when she woke up in Xing Yihan's room. Her face turned cold bit by bit, and she raised her hand to push the door open. Seeing that Jean Wan had returned, Auntie Chin rushed forward to welcome her. "Eldest miss," Jean Wan placed her hand on Auntie Chin's outstretched hand and gently patted it comfortingly. At the same time, she turned around to see Ji Hongwen sitting on the sofa in the living room with an ugly expression on his face. She also saw Ji Mengran kneeling in front of him, crying until her nose was red. "Dad, you can't do this. I'm your biological daughter. You can't just watch me be taken away by the police. You know that if I'm taken away like this, they won't let me go easily. Dad. I'm begging you. Blood is thicker than water. In this world, I'm the closest person to you, right? You have to help me. Please. Dad. I'm begging you." Jean Wan watched this scene coldly. Ji Mengran. Her voice was like a cold stream in the deep mountains, cold and bone-piercing. "Although we don't have the same father, we are at least of the same mother. It's said that blood is thicker than water, but what have you done to me? You were the one who walked step by step to this stage, and you still want to rely on kinship to save yourself? I'm afraid you're indulging in fantasy." When Ji Mengran heard Jean Wan's voice, she abruptly turned around. When she saw that Jean Wan had actually returned, her expression instantly changed. A hint of panic appeared in her eyes, and she quickly stiffened her neck and shouted at her, "Scram! This is my G family's place. Your surname isn't even G. This isn't your home. Scram!" After speaking, Ji Mengrand grabbed a cup of tea from the coffee table and was about to throw it at Jean Wan. "Try throwing it at her if you dare." Ji Hongwen's voice was filled with suppressed anger. Ji Mengrand's hand stiffened, but the cup had already left her hand and was thrown toward Jean Wan. "Eldest miss." Auntie Chin was startled. However, Jean Wan only tilted her head slightly. The cup flew over her shoulder and landed heavily on the ground, producing a loud shattering sound. She calmly glanced at the shattered teacup behind her and then at Ji Mengrand, who was kneeling in front of Ji Hongwen. It was clear that she had been crying for a long time. "You're so afraid to see me return? Why? Dad only knows that the reason you're being arrested by the police is because your studio has been sued for several commercial crimes, including the defamation that was reported to the media a few days ago. I also know that you colluded with the Xing Corporation and tried to poach people from my MN group to steal business secrets for you. In the end, you were discovered. With all these commercial crimes added together, if you're convicted, you'll only be imprisoned for a few years, isn't that right?" Hearing Jean Wan's words, Ji Mengrand's shoulders trembled. She abruptly raised her hand to grab onto Ji Hongwen's pants. Her voice trembled as she said, "Dad, let her go, hurry and let her go. I'm your daughter, don't listen to anything she says. As expected, you don't even dare to admit to the filthy things you've done." Jean Wan coldly laughed. Ji Mengrand tried to interrupt her. "Dad, hurry and make her scram. She's intentionally adding oil to the fire." Jean Wan coldly spoke without a ripple of emotion. "Me leave? After you're brought away by the police, which mess you've created in our family doesn't need me to clean up? Since you're able to do such despicable things, you should admit it. Do you want Dad to be soft-hearted toward you? Is that why you don't dare to admit to drugging Xingyi and my wine? Shut up. You're spouting nonsense." She only managed to shout out half of her words when the arm that had just climbed onto Ji Hongwen's leg was abruptly pushed away. Ji Hongwen turned to look at Jean Wan. "What drug? What Xingyi? There's nothing like that." "Dad, don't listen to her nonsense." Ji Mengrand's expression changed. She rushed to grab onto his leg again to stop him. Jean Wan wore a British-style gown. Her long, straight, and soft hair fell cleanly over her shoulders and back, perfectly complementing her originally fair and delicate face. She stood there calmly watching Ji Mengrand's crying appearance. Her gaze was clear and cold, carrying with it the steadiness of many years of experience. She would not be affected by the joy of finally getting her revenge. Instead, she was exceptionally calm. Chapter 659. "What? You?" Ji Hongwen was so angry that his face stiffened. His eyes froze, and he raised his hand to cover his heart. He stared in disbelief at Ji Mengrand, who was still kneeling by his feet. Everyone in the Ji family knew how much Ji Hongwen hated Xingyi. Many years ago, during the Spring Festival, Jean Wan was alone at home and was almost raped by Xingyi. This was a taboo in the Ji family, and no one dared to mention it. It was precisely because everyone knew that Ji Hongwen was extremely remorseful over this matter and was extremely sensitive and disgusted by it. He had been vexed for many years because of his momentary negligence that he almost caused Jean Wan. Jean Wan knew too well how powerful her words were, but she still said it. Some people really forced themselves into a dead end. They had no one to blame. "Dad, she's talking nonsense. Dad, she's talking nonsense. It's all nonsense. I've been at home for the past 2 days. You know, I've been at home. I was also at home the night before yesterday. I didn't show up at all. I wasn't even at the scene," she said. "How can she slander me like this? Dad, it's all fake. Don't believe what Jean Wan said." Dad, I beg you, bang. Before Ji Mengran could finish her words, Ji Hongwen abruptly kicked her to the carpet. Ji Mengran seemed to feel no pain. She hurriedly climbed up and crawled to his leg. Dad. Dad. I didn't. How dare you treat Jean Wan in such a disgusting way? No matter what, you are still Qing Lin's children. You have the same mother. Is this how you treat your own sister? That brat, Xing Yihan, conspired against Jean Wan, which was why I chased him out of the Ji family. Now that he harbors evil intentions against the Ji family, not only did you follow him, but you actually dared to send Jean Wan to his bed? Ji Hongwen was so angry that his voice was ragged. You made mistakes again and again, and every time they were unforgivable. But I can see that Jean Wan didn't do anything to you or force you into a dead end because of the Ji family's kindness in raising her. As long as you don't provoke her, your studio and your future can live peacefully, but you just had to provoke her. Dad, it's not like that. I didn't drug her. I didn't do it. Ji Mengran was still struggling. She sobbed and knelt by his leg, hugging it tightly. If I really drugged her, how could she return to the Ji family like this? Jean Wan coldly looked in Ji Mengran's direction. Don't you know why the police blocked the Ji family's door today? You sent me to Xing Yihan's bed, drugged us, and even arranged several reporters outside the door, waiting for an opportunity to break in and take pictures of us in bed. Just to destroy me, you must have considered the price. After all, destroying me in this way will also implicate Mo Jingshan. He definitely won't let you off. You know you won't have a good ending, so you want to die with me. You want me to ruin my reputation with you and be photographed rolling in bed with Xing Yihan, N? But the only thing you miscalculated was that I had already knocked Xing Yihan unconscious in the room. What's more, Mo Jingshan arrived and took me away in time. Otherwise, your meticulous and mutually destructive plan would really kill two birds with one stone. You're really amazing. Stop it. Ji Mengran cried shrilly. Jean Wan. I hate you. Shut up, don't say any more. Ji Mengran's tears flowed down her face. Dad, it's not like that. This is a misunderstanding. Before she could finish her words, Ji Hongwen's leg flung her away. He gave her another kick, causing her to stumble backward. She looked extremely pathetic. Ji Hongwen's face was livid. He pointed at her and said harshly, "You're really lawless and deranged. I originally thought you were just a piece of trash. I really didn't expect that you would actually do such an extreme and stupid thing. It's not like that, Dad, shut up. I just want the police to take you away as soon as possible. I, Ji Hongwen, will never admit to having a daughter like you in this lifetime." Ji Hongwen stood up and did not look at her anymore. He frowned and turned to ask Jean Wan, Mo Jingshan arrived in time? Are you sure you're all right? It's fine. The only one who met with an accident was Xing Yihan. In order to protect myself, I used an ashtray to knock him out. I heard that he's still unconscious in the hospital, Jean Wan said coldly. Ji Hongwen closed his eyes as though he was suppressing some anger. He let out a long breath. They're both daughters that I raised. What does it matter if their surname is Ji or not? The one with the surname Ji is actually deranged to such an extent. Ji Mengran's sobs rang out once more. Her voice was hoarse as she cried, "It's because you've been biased towards Jean Wan since you were young. That's why I hate her more and more. Isn't it because of you that things have come to this point? You still dare to say that I'm biased? You've mentioned this more than once since you were young. I've also reminded you time and time again that I've never been biased towards either of you sisters. Jean Wan has always given in to you. What more do you want? You dare to say that it's not because Jean Wan looks more like her mother that you're especially biased towards her? Do you dare to say it?" Ji Mengran screamed hoarsely. "Even if she looks very similar to Qing Lin, you're still my biological daughter. Is there a need for me to be biased?" Ji Hongwen rebuked. Ji Mengran sat on the ground in a sorry state. She immediately laughed coldly. That's right. You've also admitted that she looks very similar to my mother. If it wasn't because of this, how could you possibly be willing to raise an outsider's child? I really wonder which garbage dump my mother gave birth to her from. She doesn't even know who her biological father is. What's there to be arrogant about? Our Ji family provides for her food and clothing. If not for you and the Ji family, she would have long starved to death. Such a piece of trash. What right does she have to fight with me and the Ji family? What right does she have? All of a sudden, a cold and stern voice rang from outside the door. Even without the Ji family, as long as her mother brought her back to the Shao family, she would still be the apple of the Shao family's eye. How could she allow you to insult her? Ji Mengran's voice choked. She abruptly raised her eyes to see that the door to the Ji family's villa had been kicked open. A man in his 50s walked in. If she remembered correctly, this was the chairman of Ling Shao Group, Shao Zhenjuan. When Jin Wan heard these words, her back stiffened. She turned around and saw that Mr. Shao had actually entered the Ji family's door. The moment he saw Shao Zhenjuan, Ji Hongwen's complexion, which was already ashen from anger, turned even paler. He coldly stared at the man who was about his age. Chapter 660. Why did you come to the Ji family? Who allowed you to enter the Ji family? Ji Hongwen coldly said. Scram. Jin Wan did not expect such a scene. The moment she saw Mr. Shao, she heard Ji Hongwen's words. She abruptly turned to look at Ji Hongwen. Dad, since you've already guessed your relationship with the Shao family, why do you keep avoiding me? Even when something happened, you refused to ask for my help. Right now, the Ji family is in such a mess. His daughter keeps framing you. Why are you still standing here? When Mr. Shao heard her call Ji Hongwen Dad, his expression darkened. Nuan, I know about all of this. Come back to the Shao family with me. In the future, Ji Mengran's dirty water will never be able to touch you again. Hearing these words, Ji Mengran stared at Jin Wan in disbelief. What Shao family? Jin Wan did not speak. Her gaze remained fixed on the ashen-faced Ji Hongwen. She did not look at Mr. Shao any longer. Elder Shao coldly watched Ji Mengran, who was sitting on the ground in a sorry state. It's very simple. Earlier on, the rubbish heap you mentioned is the Shao family. Jin Wan's biological father is me. Even without the Ji family, she wouldn't have suffered from hunger and cold as you wished. If only Qing Lin's temper had softened and told me about her pregnancy, everything would not have turned out this way. Furthermore, you would never have existed in this world because she would never have married Ji Hongwen. Ji Hongwen abruptly raised his hand to cover his heart. He swayed slightly. Jin Wan was startled and rushed forward to support him. Dad. Ji Mengran did not notice Ji Hongwen's expression at all. When she heard that Jin Wan was actually the daughter of Ling Shao Group's chairman, it was as though she had been struck by lightning. No, impossible. Impossible. How could she be your daughter? She's just an illegitimate daughter with no status. I know that my mother was raped. She's the daughter of a rapist. She can't be your daughter. Mr. Zhao's expression instantly turned ugly. He coldly glanced at Ji Mengran before turning to look at Jin Wan, who remained standing by Ji Hongwen's side. Rapist? Is that how you describe me? Old Master Shao frowned coldly. Ji Hongwen, I haven't settled the score with you for stealing my wife and daughter behind my back, and you've already instilled such thoughts into the children? Isn't it? Ji Hongwen pushed Jin Wan's hand away and took a deep breath with some difficulty. You went back on your word and left her in America. You came back to marry the fiancé your family had decided on. When you remembered her, your son had already been born. She waited for you in America for several years. What did she get in the end? Ji Hongwen laughed coldly. You can say that you were forced, or that your family was pressuring you, but you were still married and had a wife and a child. Yet, when she found out the truth and wanted to cut all ties with you, you locked her up, took her, tortured her, and locked her up in the basement of the villa for 3 whole months. In the end, she was pregnant with your child and escaped. If I hadn't taken her away, I'm afraid she would have been tortured to death before the child was born. You didn't just rape her, you even abused her. Jean Wan instantly raised her head to look at Old Master Xiao in disbelief. When Old Master Xiao received Jean Wan's astonished gaze, his expression stiffened. He frowned and said, at that time, Qing Lin couldn't return to her home. She had nowhere to go. I was afraid that she would be in a bad mood and leave on her own, so I let her live in the villa but never locked her up in the basement. I admit that I forced her to stay, but if I had known that she was pregnant, I would have taken good care of the mother and daughter. I would have divorced her and married her, keeping her in the Xiao family openly. Even if you didn't lock her in the basement, didn't you still hide her in a place that your family didn't know about? She had no intention of interfering in your marriage, but you forced her to be the one who couldn't see the light of day. You destroyed the relationship you had with your own hands in America. No matter how strong your love was, it couldn't compare to the hurt you caused her. She didn't even know whether she loved you or hated you. If she didn't love you, she wouldn't have given birth to Jean Wan. But if she didn't hate you, she wouldn't have married me with a child. If she didn't love you, she wouldn't have died holding the necklace you gave her in America. But if she didn't hate me, she wouldn't have refused to inform you of her death. Ji Hongwen coldly looked at him. The one surnamed Xiao, back when we were studying in America, we competed fairly. In the end, I lost to you wholeheartedly. I withdrew because I believed that you could give Qing Lin a good future. But what was the result? In the end, you ruined her life. When Old Master Xiao heard that Jean Wan's mother refused to inform him of her death, his eyes darkened. Jean Wan saw the eyes of this man in his 50s, who was said to be like a god in Ling Xiao group, gradually turning red. She didn't know what kind of love he had for her mother. She didn't know what kind of romance they had in America. But in the end, after he got married and had a son, he turned his love into tyrannical possessiveness and ruined her mother's life because of his selfishness and his refusal to let her go. No wonder Mo Jingshan said that if she met Old Master Xiao, she might not be happy. It turned out that when she learned what happened to her birth, she was indeed not very happy. Having a powerful father was not enough to satisfy her, because this father was too powerful, so he had the ability to lock up her mother 20 years ago and even dared to do whatever he wanted to her mother. Her mother finally flew out of that remote place with her own ability, but in the end, her wings were broken by Xiao Zhenjuan. Chapter 661. The only thing you did wrong? Listen, it was so difficult for you to shoulder the blame, yet you still act so righteously. Ji Hongwen coldly laughed. As expected, even at such an old age, you still want to protect your damn face. In front of your child, you can't even put down your pride to admit your mistake. Qing Lin's life has already been ruined by you. She has already left for so many years. Don't you feel the slightest bit of guilt in your heart? To this day, do you still think that it was her fault that she left while pregnant? Xiao Zhenjuan closed his eyes and was silent for a long time before saying, she has already left for so many years. Regardless of whether it was my fault or not, what I want to do now is to make it up to my daughter. If Qing Lin still holds a grudge against me for what I did back then, when we meet in the netherworld 100 years later, I will apologize to her. But this is not a reason for you, Ji Hongwen, to hide my daughter for so many years. You even gave your own daughter so many chances to frame her. Ji Mengran, who had been sitting on the carpet for a long time, seemed to be the forgotten one. Suddenly being mentioned, she stiffened and looked at Ji Hongwen with reddened eyes. Dad, I didn't. Ji Hongwen closed his eyes. I admit to this point. It was my fault for not raising my daughter properly. That's why Mengran could even do such a despicable thing. Ji Mengran cried out, Dad. Even at a time like this, you're still speaking up for an outsider. Others are already planning to take Jin Wan away. In the future, Jin Wan will no longer be your daughter. If even I am taken away by the police, do you want to spend the rest of your life alone? Ji Hongwen closed his eyes. Spending the rest of my life alone is much better than having a heartless and unscrupulous person by my side who framed her own sister for the sake of the family fortune. Hey! Ji Mengran suddenly laughed with reddened eyes. If Jin Wan is really the Shao family's daughter, do you think she would still be interested in the Ji Corporation's things? Jin Wan's hand on Ji Hongwen's arm did not leave. She coldly said, "Don't use your brainless mind to guess at me. Dad is currently in his 50s. If it weren't for you causing him to act up, he would still be in the prime of his life. At the very least, the G Corporation would still be in his hands for another 30 to 40 years. Why are you in such a hurry to get the family fortune? Do you really want Dad to step down as soon as possible?" In Xiao Zhenjuan's hands, Ling Xiao Group was like the sun at high noon. Since they were classmates when they were studying in America, they were the same age. For a moment, Jin Wan felt indignant. Why did Xiao Zhenjuan's body appear to be as healthy as a young man's, while Ji Hongwen was inferior to him? She had to arrange for 2 top-notch medical staff to be by Ji Hongwen's side to watch him exercise every day. She wouldn't stop until he was exceptionally healthy and strong within 2 years. Ji Mengran yelled, "I didn't say, now, because the last time I went back to the Ji family, Dad kept saying that he wouldn't leave a single cent to me in the future. I never said that I would make him give up his position now. Jin Wan, you're an outsider in the Ji family. Stop trying to sow discord here." Xiao Zhenjuan coldly narrowed his eyes at the reckless Ji Mengran before turning to look at Jin Wan. "Outsider? Nuan, come back with me. As long as the Xiao family is here, you'll never be an outsider." Jin Wan didn't hesitate at all. She helped Ji Hongwen back to the sofa and sat down. At the same time, she stood up from the sofa. Without looking back at Xiao Zhenjuan, she said coldly, "Mr. Xiao must have come to the Ji family because you heard about what happened to me recently and rushed over to do something for me. I'm very grateful for Mr. Zhao's willingness to help me, but I'm sorry, I'm not related to the Xiao family at all. I have other ways to solve my problem. There's no need for you to trouble yourself. Besides, Mr. Xiao, you should be able to tell that the Ji family doesn't welcome you. You may leave." Hearing Jin Wan's words, Ji Hongwen suddenly looked up at her. Xiao Zhenjuan wasn't surprised, but he obviously didn't expect that Ji Hongwen's biological daughter would still cling to the Ji family even though she was so against her. Xiao Zhenjuan said seriously, "In fact, you've already guessed it. Since I met you twice, with your sharp wit, you must have guessed the relationship between you and the Xiao family many times, but you always avoided it. I can respect your choice. After all, we haven't seen each other for more than 20 years, and you don't have any father-daughter relationship with me. I understand that, but now the Ji family is like an abyss. You won't get any benefits even if you stay. You'd better come back with me. After all, we're related by blood, and the relationship between father and daughter can be cultivated slowly. Believe me, as long as the Xiao family is here, no one dares to stand on your head and make trouble. As long as I'm alive, I'll definitely spoil you like a princess. You'll be the apple of my Xiao family's eye. There's no such thing as an abyss. I grew up here, and this is my home. The person sitting on the sofa is my father," Jin Wan said flatly. "If Mr. Xiao had been standing outside for a long time, you should have heard Ji Mingran's complaint just now. She accused my father of favoring me since I was a child, so I've never been wronged here. As for the princess, I'm already in my 20s. How can I dream of being a princess? The Ji family used to be one of the 4 big families in High City, and I don't think it's any worse than the Xiao family. Mr. Xiao, you don't have to be so arrogant and condescending. Every inch under my feet carries my childhood memories and the warm and happy memories of my mother in the last few years of her life. This is my root." Xiao Zhenjuan looked at her and slowly frowned. "Nuan. Jin Wan finally turned to look at him. Please call me Miss Ji. My relationship with Mr. Xiao isn't close enough for you to address me like this. Xiao Zhenjuan's hand, which was about to reach out to her, froze in midair. After a long while, he slowly lowered his hand. He turned back to look at the door behind him and changed the topic. The police have been waiting outside for a long time. Ji Hongwen, are you still not going to throw your daughter out for committing a crime? Ji Mengran rushed to crawl to Ji Hongwen's leg. Dad. Dad, please. Before her hand could touch Ji Hongwen's leg, Xiao Zhenjuan's expression turned cold. Two bodyguards suddenly entered the door. They stepped forward and lifted Ji Mengran up without any hesitation. Chapter 662. Ji Mengran's cries grew further and further until the police car door slammed shut with a kapeng, finally cutting off her cries. Nuan, are you sure you don't want to return to the Xiao family with me? Xiao Zhenjuan turned to look at Jin Wan after it finally quietened down. Jin Wan glanced at the door. Mr. Xiao brought bodyguards here today. Is it to kidnap Ji Mengran or to forcefully take me away from the Ji family? Xiao Zhenjuan's expression faltered. Ji Hongwen immediately snorted coldly. He has been despotic for too long. Back then, he used forceful methods to bring your mother back home. Now that he has decided to acknowledge you as his daughter, of course he will use the same methods to take you away. Xiao Zhenjuan's gaze faltered. He softly said, the bodyguards won't touch you. It's up to you whether you want to return to the Xiao family with me or not. But I still hope that you can think it through and come back with me. That time when I met you alone, you mentioned your mother. I know that you are sensitive and won't easily compromise. I won't use too forceful methods. Don't worry. Jin Wan did not speak. Ji Hongwen sneered. That's right. Back then, Qing Lin was alone in America. There was no one to support her. She was forcefully taken away by you, and no one dared to stop her. By the time I found out, everything had already happened. But Jin Wan is different. The person standing behind her is Mo Jingshan. He is someone that even you, an old thing who has dominated the domestic business world for decades, dare not provoke. Of course, you won't dare to forcefully take her away. Otherwise, even if Mo Jingshan turns the Xiao family upside down, he will definitely find her. Must you stand between me and my daughter and use such a method to sow discord? Xiao Zhenjuan's expression turned ugly. The grudges from decades ago will be settled between the two of us. Nuan is my daughter who was lost for more than 20 years. Even if you are angry for Qing Lin, you shouldn't forcefully take my child. I sow discord? Ji Hongwen sneered. The truth is right before your eyes. Do you still need me to sow discord? Because of Mo Jingshan's existence, you didn't provoke her too much, but you have long wanted to bring her back to the Xiao family. You've been thinking about this for a long time. I've asked her to go back to Ji City and visit Qing Lin's hometown. I think Jin Wan is very familiar with her mother's hardships and helplessness. At Jin Wan's age, we can't fool her with just a few words. She has her own feelings and thoughts. Don't think that everyone is your employee or your puppet and can do whatever you want her to do. I don't need this daughter of mine. If she wants to leave, I won't stop her. But if she refuses to leave, she will still be my daughter. Ji Hongwen's eyes widened as he looked at Jin Wan and Ji Hongwen. You're right, Jin Wan, Ji Hongwen. You can't fool her with just a few words. She has her own feelings and thoughts. Don't think that everyone is your company's employee or your puppet and she can do whatever you want. Xiao Zhenjuan placed one hand behind his back. Ever since he entered the Ji family's home, he had been standing there with his back straight. Although he didn't do it on purpose, he still exuded the aura and demeanor of a superior. He said coldly, as long as you can protect her, I don't have to disregard our family's vow to come here early in the morning to take her away. This time, Ji Mengran's various tricks and frame-up against her are extremely vicious. A while ago, I found out something from the old servants of the Ji family who left many years ago. When Wan was only a teenager, you married that Shinharu into the family and allowed her to bring her son, Shingihan, into the Ji family. What was the result? In the end, because of your negligence, she almost made a huge mistake. She was almost raped by that brat, and in the end, she suffered from the cold. Ji Hongwan's expression faltered. He paused and turned to look at Jin Wan. This was a knot in Ji Hongwan's heart for half of his life. Earlier, because of this matter, he vented his anger on Ji Mengran. He hated her very much. But he had to admit that this was indeed because of his negligence back then. Jin Wan's cold voice rang at this moment. Mr. Xiao, even if I grew up in the Xiao family, I might not have lived a better life than here. The Xiao family's business is so big, and there are so many people. Mr. Xiao is usually so busy. Can you guarantee that you won't be negligent? The grace of raising someone is greater than the heavens. You're nitpicking at my father's efforts all these years. Aren't you going a little too far? Xiao Zhenjuan watched her figure that kept her face turned sideways. Nuan, you also said that he raised you. That means he acknowledges that I'm your biological father. Must you speak to me like this? Jin Wan turned to look at him. I'm the one involved in the decision to raise him. I have the clearest and most obvious understanding of how to choose and how to do it. The right lies in my hands. Mr. Xiao doesn't seem to have the right to morally blackmail me. Xiao Zhenjuan choked. Jin Wan's stubbornness was really like his. If he could soften a little, he wouldn't have ended up like that with her mother. It was precisely because he knew himself too well that he understood Jin Wan. At this time, nothing he said or did could change her mind. He could only treat time as a good medicine and let it seep in little by little. Perhaps only then could she face the fact that her surname was Xiao. At this moment, Jin Wan's cell phone rang. She turned to answer it. She didn't go to the company yesterday on Monday. Today, the company had something to do and she had to rush over. After hanging up the phone, she took a look at the time and turned to tell Ji Hongwan that she had something to do in the company and would find time to go back to the Ji family later. Just as she was about to leave, she walked past Xiao Zhenjuan and stopped. She said coolly, President Xiao, please leave the Ji family. Since you made a vow many years ago to mind your own business, please leave. My father has been in a bad mood recently, and his health isn't good. Don't be an eyesore here. Xiao Zhenjuan's eyelids suddenly twitched. He turned his eyes, but Jin Wan didn't even look at him and walked out without looking back. At the same time, Los Angeles, USA. In front of the headquarters of Shine Group in Los Angeles, a black off-road vehicle had been parked for a long time. In the car, Nanheng looked indifferently at the helicopter hovering over the roof of Shine Group and picked up the phone to call Mo Jingshan in High City. Chapter 663. After Jin Wan returned to the company, her phone rang several times, but she was busy with the meeting and didn't answer. When it was dark and it was time to get off work, she returned to the office and discussed the unfinished matters from the meeting with her secretary and other staff. She was busy until 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. Her phone, which she had forgotten to charge, had run out of battery, so she didn't notice who called her in the afternoon. When she was finally done, Xiao Ba returned to the assistant's office to work overtime, while Jin Wan stayed in the CEO's office to review the documents she had left behind yesterday. After reading them, she sat alone in the quiet office, thinking of what happened at the Ji family this morning. She had never thought deeply about her identity, especially when she learned that she might be related to the Xiao family. If Ji Hongwan hadn't specially asked her to return to Ji City and revealed that he wanted to have a showdown with her, she would rather not know anything and just be a good daughter of the Ji family. But today, Mr. Zhao's sudden appearance caught her off guard. Perhaps if Ji Mengran hadn't gone too far and Xiao Zhenjuan couldn't stand it anymore, perhaps he wouldn't have come so hurriedly to reunite with her. But today, when she suddenly learned of her mother's entanglement with those two men, Jin Wan really didn't expect it. On the other hand, what Xiaoba didn't expect was to see Mo Jingshan come to their company in her lifetime. Xiaoba was working overtime in the assistant's office at night. Halfway through, she went out to pour a glass of water, but she suddenly saw CEO Mo. When they were still a studio in High City, several of their colleagues had discussed excitedly in private, wondering when CEO Mo would come in person, which would definitely cause a considerable sensation. However, before they realized this idea, Jin Wan had gone to the UK. Since then, it seemed that Mo Jingshan had never really stepped into MN Group, which belonged to Jin Wan. She didn't expect that one day, CEO Mo would really come. The receptionist on duty recognized him and learned from the news that he and Jin Wan were husband and wife, so she didn't dare to stop him, so there was no need to announce CEO Mo's arrival. When Xiaoba saw him, he had almost reached the door of the CEO's office. CEO Mo? Xiaoba was holding a cup of water. It was hard to tell if his face was filled with excitement or confusion. What are you? Is she in the office? Mo Jingshan asked. Xiaoba quickly nodded. Yes, boss is in the office, but she should have finished her work at this time, but she hasn't gone home yet. It's probably because it's too late and she wants to rest in the office for the night. Mo Jingshan did not speak further and went straight to his office. Xiaoba didn't dare to knock on the door or inform Jin Wan. Anyway, CEO Mo wouldn't eat her. Even if he did, it was reasonable and legal. She didn't dare to interfere, so she quietly went back to her assistant's office with a glass of water. Jin Wan was not in the office. As Xiaoba said, she was in the break room. She couldn't make it to the company for Monday's meeting, so the meeting was moved to tomorrow morning. Since it was too early, she decided to stay at the company. There was a balcony outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the break room. Jin Wan stood by the window. The window was not closed, and the door to the office was not closed. Mo Jingshan entered the office. The moment he reached the break room, he saw her back view. The little woman's arms were crossed over her chest, her long hair fluttering in the wind. The shawl she wore in the office was also fluttering in the wind. Mo Jingshan stood there for a while and didn't enter. He turned to her desk to pick up her phone, only to see that her phone was out of battery. After about 10 minutes, the man walked to the break room. Jin Wan didn't seem to hear him. She still stood there. Outside the window, High City was brightly lit, and the world was filled with endless prosperity. But as she stood there, it was as though she was standing in this endless prosperity. Her entire body was cold and cheerless. It wasn't until Mo Jingshan approached that Jin Wan heard him and turned around. She suddenly looked at him and blurted out, "How many times did my phone ring in the afternoon? Were you the one who called?" With that, she closed the window. After all, standing here for a while, the wind was indeed a little cold. She turned to walk out. She didn't plan to stay in the break room any longer, but the moment she brushed past the man, he reached out and held her wrist. Feeling the coldness of her hand, Mo Jingshan's brows furrowed. High City's weather is gradually getting colder. Why aren't you resting after work? Why are you standing by the window in the cold wind? Jin Wan's hand was indeed cold, but she was wearing autumn clothes and had a shawl on, so she wouldn't catch a cold. However, her hand was indeed very warm when held by him. She didn't turn back to look at him, only saying, "It's not cold. Being in the wind for a while will keep me awake." The man didn't allow her to return to the office. He pulled her back to his side and touched her face with his other hand. It was also cold, but thankfully, the coldness was only on the surface of her skin and wasn't a big problem. There was a clock on the wall in the break room. Jin Wan glanced at the time. "It's so late. Why did you come to my company?" He didn't look at the time but lowered his head to look at her. "Did you return to the G home in the morning? And G Mengran was taken away by the police? Mr. Xiao also went to the G home?" As expected, nothing could be hidden from him. Regardless of whether it was his guess or everything was within his expectations, there didn't seem to be anything to hide. Jean Wan lowered her head. I don't want to talk about anything related to the Shao family. Ji Mengran's matter has finally come to an end. I've worked all day and am very tired. If you don't have anything else to do, I'm returning to Los Angeles tomorrow. Have a good meal with me tonight, En? The man's abrupt words caused Jean Wan's expression to falter. For a moment, she forgot to pull her hand out of his. Seeing Jean Wan's startled expression, Mo Jingshan lowered his head to look at their intertwined hands. He didn't let go and instead held her even tighter. Let's go to your company and find a random restaurant. You haven't eaten tonight. Let's go eat together. Jean Wan finally returned to herself. She was about to pull her hand out of his but couldn't. Oh, then let's go eat. But can you let go of my hand? Mo Jingshan didn't release her hand. He watched her and chuckled lightly. It's rare for me to have a chance to pick Mrs. Mo up from work and have a meal together. How could I let go of your hand? Jean Wan rolled her eyes at him. Don't you want to eat? I'll go get my bag. I'll help you. Jean Wan glanced at the hand he was holding and pursed her lips. Chapter 664. For a man like Mo Jingshan, it took too much courage to stand by his side again. She had to give up too much. It wasn't that she couldn't do it, but Jean Wan picked up her bag and went out with him. In the elevator, she lowered her eyes to look at the ground. Her eyelashes hid the shadow in her eyes. In fact, it also took courage to watch Mo Jingshan return to America. He still had an impression of the 10 years he left. To her, America was a huge shadow, but Shine's headquarters was still in Los Angeles. Mo Jingshan squeezed the hand she obediently placed in his palm. He looked at her in the mirror and said mildly, You can't bear for me to leave? You want me to stay in High City? Jean Wan was startled and raised her eyes. No. It was impossible for Shine to move back to the country like MN Group. It was unrealistic for him to stay in High City forever. She had never thought about it. Mo Jingshan stared at her face, his thin lips curved slightly. After watching her for a moment, he said calmly, In the next 3 years, I've completely renovated and rebuilt the U Garden. If you want me to stay in High City, the condition is that you come back to the U Garden with me. Jean Wan, she was surprised. U Garden has been renovated and rebuilt? He looked at her seemingly surprised expression and his handsome brows moved slightly. Didn't you dislike the U Garden's renovation a long time ago? Back when we got married, grandfather personally installed it. Neither of us participated in it. The previous U Garden is a farewell to the past. Now, the U Garden is the home that I've poured all my heart into. It's just waiting for you, the mistress, to return. No. Mo Jingshan, aren't you going back to America? Although she couldn't figure out why he specially invited her for a meal before returning to America, Jean Wan strangely felt that he wouldn't be returning anytime soon. But now, he was talking about the U Garden. In the past 3 years, he had even rebuilt and renovated their marital home, saying that the U Garden was waiting for her return. Could it be that he planned to stay in High City in the future? The two went to a Western restaurant below her company. After entering the restaurant, the waiter arranged a quiet and elegant table for them. Mo Jingshan finally released her hand and let Jean Wan sit down. Most of the dishes were ordered by Jean Wan. Mo Jingshan only ordered a steak, and the other dishes that were gradually delivered to the table were all ordered by Jean Wan. Most of the time, Mo Jingshan watched her eat. The portion sizes in this restaurant are very small. Do you think a small piece of steak like yours will fill you up? Jean Wan picked up a piece of foie gras with a thin piece of bread while looking at the steak in front of Mo Jingshan that had barely been touched. I'm not very hungry. You're not very hungry, but you specifically came to me for dinner? Jean Wan speechlessly picked up another piece of foie gras from the plate in front of her with bread, put some Western side dish leaves in it, and handed it to him. Eat this. Seeing that her words were hard, but her heart was soft. She clearly did not say a single word of reluctance, yet her expression seemed as though she was afraid he would be hungry. Mo Jingshan smiled and accepted it gratefully. He also gratefully ate the foie gras she had rolled. After that, he continued to watch her eat, and in the end, she couldn't control herself. Fortunately, she ordered a lot and put all the food on the plate in front of him, forcing him to eat more. In autumn, there were many rainy days in High City. When they left the company, the weather was clearly fine, but after eating, it rained. It was only a 5-minute walk from the company's main entrance. The two did not drive or bring an umbrella. Mo Jingshan sent her back to the company, but in just a few minutes, the two of them were drenched in the rain. Even though Mo Jingshan's temperament was not affected in the slightest by the rain, Jin Wan still mercifully allowed him to take a shower in her break room. She also asked the nearby 24-hour shopping mall to send a change of men's clothes over. Mo Jingshan showered and dried his short hair. Although it no longer dripped water, it still fell slightly on his forehead, causing the originally cold and stern man to appear more seductive and abstinent. He changed into a set of black shirt and trousers that she had just asked the shopping mall to send over. It was the brand he usually wore. Perhaps the two of them did not need to put on a show to understand each other, but such a small detail and habit was enough to show that their relationship as husband and wife was actually quite peaceful. Aside from the various entanglements and misunderstandings that had occurred in the past, there was nothing wrong with it as long as they were not divorced. Seeing that the man had changed and come out, Jin Wan, who had also just gone to the vice president's break room to take a shower, glanced at him. In an instant, many thoughts flashed through her mind. Jin Wan. Mo Jingshan looked at her and instantly caught her stunned expression because he was wearing the clothes she had bought for him. He remained calm and collected, his voice low and heavy. Have you thought it through? Do you want to move back to the Yew Garden with me? Moving back to the Yew Garden meant that he wanted to let go of the past and resume their married life. She would still be his Mrs. Mo. Jin Wan sat at the end of the bed in the break room and casually picked up a pillow to hold in her arms. She lowered her head to look at the pillow in her arms, cleared her throat, and said, "Let's talk about it when you come back from America. After all, you have so many things to deal with in America. I don't even know when you'll be able to return to High City. I don't have time to think so much right now." Mo Jingshan looked at her without a word. Jin Wan coughed dryly. "You've showered and changed your clothes. It's time to go back, right? I'll stay at the company tonight. I won't keep you." Jin Wan. "You know that my break room isn't as big as the one in your office. It's small enough for me to live alone. Don't even think about staying here." It was true that her break room wasn't big, but it wasn't so small that it couldn't even accommodate one Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan walked over and single-handedly took the pillow from her arms, throwing it back onto the bed behind her. He calmly said, "I'm returning to America tomorrow. Are you planning to draw a line with me after I shower and leave? You said you'll wait for me to return from America. If I really do come back, I'm afraid you'll have already fled to Java. I won't even be able to catch you. Don't think I don't know that you're as slippery as a loach right now." Jin Wan, he calmly asked, "Are you going back to the Yew Garden?" Jin Wan glanced at him. "I already said, we'll talk about it when you return from America. Are you sure you won't run?" Jin Wan felt guilty. High City is only so big. Where can I run to? It's not like I can return to London. Chapter 665. The man stared at her face with his deep eyes, and there was a hint of a smile between his brows. When he lowered his head, he approached her dangerously. His voice was low and seductive. "If you're afraid that the Yew Garden won't be able to accommodate you, you can buy the buildings behind the Yew Garden. It's only 2,000 or 3,000 square meters. It's not like it can't accommodate you." Jin Wan, she lay on the bed and scowled because this position was not beneficial to her. "Don't you think it's good for us to live our own lives like this? We don't interfere with each other and have our own lives. Besides, your Shine is busy enough, and my MN group is also busy. Even if we live together, there's no need for us to live together. Besides, I'm not in the mood to build a relationship right now. It's a waste of time. Mo Jingshan was so angry that he almost laughed. This woman really dared to say anything she wanted to say. Jin Wan, do you really think I can't do anything to you? Her long hair spread out behind her back, and her thick and slender eyelashes blinked several times. Her face gradually turned red because of the man's ambiguous position. I'm telling the truth. Also, this is my office break room. There are people working overtime in my company. Someone might come in at any time. Mo Jingshan, don't. The man lowered his head and kissed her. Jin Wan was about to raise her hands only to find that her hands had been single-handedly held above her head. Since that night in Jing City and this time when she was drugged by Ji Mengran, the two of them had been separated for 3 years. After all, they were no longer starting from zero. They seemed to have regained their memories and were like the most ordinary husband and wife in the past. But she was still extremely sensitive to Mo Jingshan's every kiss. And it was in her office break room. It seemed to be the first time he came to her workplace. 3 years ago, he only parked his car in front of the building when she got off work and never came in. But today, he came in for the first time, but he directly pressed her down on the bed in the break room. Mo Jingshan, Jin Wan's face was burning hot. It was no different from when she was drugged. She had clearly pestered this man in Aolan International the night before yesterday. Last night, she went to bed too early and didn't know how he slept. It had only been one night, but he had already come here. Just as Jin Wan was feeling suspicious, the man's hand had already reached under the skirt of her business attire. Mo Jingshan. Do we still need you to worry about our relationship? The man's voice was right by her lips, low and husky. Jin Wan struggled to free one of her hands, but the man easily pressed it against her side. If you dare to do it to me in my office, ugh, Jin Wan almost cried out, let me go. She was completely unaware of how soft her voice was at this moment, but it made the lower body of the man who was just using his hand to stir up trouble quickly tense up. He lowered his head and fiercely blocked her lips that were about to curse again. At this moment, both of them were extremely sober. They were not drunk, drugged, feverish, or having any irrational emotions. Jin Wan was pressed down by him, and her tongue was wantonly invaded. She even suspected that this man had deliberately come to find her before returning to America and deliberately left an unforgettable mark on her before leaving. The man's fingers teased her until her whole body was limp and weak. No matter how she resisted, she could not suppress her body's reaction. After all, her body was too familiar with Mo Jingshan. Although 3 years had made her more cautious and sensitive, just these 2 times were enough for her body to recall many things in the past, and each time, Mo Jingshan spared no effort. Even though they had been entangled for who knew how long in Aolan International the night before and yesterday morning, when the man sank into her, Jin Wan could not help but let out a low gasp. She lowered her head and bit down on his shoulder. Mo Jingshan. You said you're going back to America tomorrow and that you want me to accompany you for dinner. Your purpose is to squeeze me once before you leave. Once? It should be more than once. He moved harshly. When Jin Wan raised her head to moan, he chuckled softly, panting slightly. You didn't answer the phone in the afternoon, so I had to come to see for myself. I didn't expect all this to happen in your office, but I have to admit that it's not bad. Perhaps Jin Wan was afraid that Xiao Ba, who was in the nearby assistant's office, would hear them, or that other employees who were working overtime might hear something when they passed by, so Jin Wan did not dare to struggle too much. It was precisely because she was extremely obedient that the man's kisses moved from her brows to her eyelids, to the tip of her nose, her lips, her cheeks, her chin, and her fair neck. He even gradually began his own rhythm. Every deep kiss made Jin Wan involuntarily bite her lips. In the end, the man had almost stripped her of her clothes, but the shirt and trousers she had just bought for him were still there. Jin Wan's fingers gripped his clothes uncontrollably, and her voice was as soft as a cat's. You should hurry up. Mo Jingshan bit her ear. Are you sure you want me to hurry up on this kind of thing? Jin Wan, what was wrong with this man today? Usually, he would take things slowly with her step by step. Why did it seem like he was cutting off all means of retreat today? She could not help but bury her head against his neck, her tone filled with uncontrollable grievance. Yesterday morning, my entire body was so sore that I couldn't get out of bed. Why didn't you ask me if I couldn't take it? Besides, the night before yesterday, I only clung onto you because I had no choice. What are you doing now? Aren't you clearly using tomorrow's return to America as an excuse? The man chuckled softly. Now that your wings are so firm, do you think I would dare to bully you? Then what are you doing now? We're husband and wife. What do you think I'm doing? Jin Wan sobbed softly because of his sudden action of lowering his waist. Even if we didn't divorce, after 3 years of our relationship, it's no different from a marriage of convenience. It's just that we're husband and wife in the eyes of the law, but in reality, this is a marriage of convenience. The man's breathing became heavier and more chaotic as he lowered his body. However, he also became more languid. Isn't this the true meaning of being husband and wife? This time, it doesn't count. The man was probably very satisfied with her hoarse and low panting voice. He leaned down by her ear and bit her earlobe, speaking in a low and heavy voice. Jin Wan, it doesn't matter if you admit it or not. You're destined to be my woman. You can't escape even if you want to. Jin Wan's knuckles turned white from gripping his shirt. Her eyes gradually became misty from sweat. The man used his fingers to stroke her eyelashes and eyes, then reached out to help her lift her sweaty hair that was stuck to her cheeks. Jin Wan took the opportunity to raise her head to bite his hand. However, she heard the man chuckle above her head. 3 years ago, you didn't have this habit. Recently, I realized that whenever you can't take it anymore, you like to bite others. You like to bite me so much. N. Dash. Chapter 666. Hearing this, Jin Wan immediately let go of his fingers and slapped his hand away. The man chuckled as he pinched her cheeks, which were soft and pink from the surging tides of passion. His lips held back a smile. You even like to hit people when you're shy. When did you learn to be so violent? Just because Fong Ling went to England to accompany you for a year? Did she teach you all that? What has it got to do with Fong Ling? She only taught me some self-defense skills. Mo Jingshan kissed her delicate chin, smiling as he kissed. She was completely dominated by Nanhang, yet she still had the ability to run to England to teach you self-defense skills. It seems like you didn't skimp on protecting her that year. Jin Wan, speaking of which, the year Fong Ling went to England to accompany her, she really did slip away from Nanhang's side. Later on, when Nanhang went to kidnap her back, it was quite a scene, but Fong Ling did not appreciate it at all. Seeing that she could actually be distracted by other things at a time like this, the man lifted the blanket, scooped her in, and continued. Jin Wan widened her eyes under the blanket, watching him warily in the darkness. However, the man used his physical strength to pull her consciousness back from her wandering thoughts. She was completely unable to think about anything else. In consideration of Jin Wan's overexertion last night, Mo Jingshan did not torment her for the entire night. However, in the end, Jin Wan was still extremely sleepy. She closed her eyes and lay motionless on the pillow. The man held her, lying with her on the bed in her office break room. His nostrils were filled with the fragrance of her hair. Mo Jingshan slept like this tonight. The next morning, when he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the woman's porcelain-like, clean skin buried under her long hair. She was still in a deep sleep, and her breathing was even. She had woken up once during the night, but he had hugged her and coaxed her back to sleep. Right now, she was obediently leaning against his chest, sleeping especially peacefully. Mo Jingshan glanced at the time. It was already past 7 in the morning. Looking at the sleeping face of the woman in his arms, he had no time to think. He directly held her chin and kissed her. Jean Wan was awakened by the kiss. She opened her eyes with a frown, only to see the man's handsome face in front of her. She closed her eyes again and tried to turn over to continue sleeping, but the man did not let her move and only left lingering kisses on her lips. Jean Wan was kissed awake and raised her hand to push against his chest. Mo Jingshan. Aren't you going back to America today? She was still very sleepy. Yes. She asked in a hoarse voice, what time is it? 7:15. Hearing the time, Jean Wan opened her eyes again. Today, the company had a Monday morning meeting, which would start at 8 o'clock. If she got up to shower and tidy up now, she most likely wouldn't even have time to eat breakfast. If she continued to sleep, it would be too late. But last night, even though Mo Jingshan had let her go in the first half of the night, she was still very tired and sleepy. She grumbled and hugged the blanket as she turned over on the bed. I'll sleep for another 2 minutes. I'll wake up in 2 minutes. Mo Jingshan, he turned the woman who was still hugging the blanket over and kissed her again without hesitation. Jean Wan had no choice but to open her eyes and look at him in confusion. What are you doing? Get up. We'll go to the meeting after breakfast. Jean Wan rolled her eyes at the ceiling. Are you sure you're going back to America today? Why do I feel that you're even more free than me? It's not like I'll miss breakfast. The man said indifferently, I'll go back to the company after watching you eat breakfast. My flight is in the afternoon. Don't tell me you're so shameless that you want me to send you off. She strangely felt that this man seemed to have the intention of packing her up and taking her to America. No need. Hearing these two words, Jean Wan finally got up from the bed lazily. She turned to see that Mo Jingshan had lifted the blanket and gotten out of bed. The man's shirt and trousers were a little wrinkled, but it did not affect his overall appearance. He would simply iron the shirt before he went out. It just so happened that there was a spare ironing machine in the break room. She had accidentally pressed the button by the bedside when she got up, and the curtain had been automatically opened. The sunlight that spilled in from the window fell on the man. He had a head of slightly messy black short hair, and his facial features were particularly clean and handsome in the morning light. Seeing that she really did not intend to stay in bed, the man turned and entered the bathroom. Jean Wan looked at his tall back and raised her hand to rub her hair hard. Although she was still very sleepy, she finally accepted her fate and got up. After all, even if she did not eat breakfast, she could not sleep at this time. The sound of water in the bathroom rang. She glanced in that direction. Only then did she take the time to carefully think about what had happened after he came last night. He said that he was going back to America today. He said that he wanted her to accompany him to dinner. Then, when he sent her back, he was drenched in the rain and took a shower here. Then, things developed to an unmanageable stage. Then, she hugged him to sleep. After a night, it was as though they had lived the warm life of a married couple. He woke her up, told her to eat breakfast, and then she went to work while he prepared to fly back to America in the afternoon. If it were not for the matter of returning to America, everything seemed perfect. Was this man purposely reminding her of the good times they used to be together? He wanted her to remember all of this and obediently return to his side when he returned from America? Logically speaking, Jean Wan should be angry at this man for every step he took. However, the moment she remembered that he was about to return to America, and she didn't know when he would be back, the anger she felt immediately dissipated. Mo Jingshan only used the bathroom for a few minutes. After all, they had both showered after last night. He simply washed up and came out. Seeing that he had come out, Jean Wan could only get up to wash up as well. After tidying up, she pushed open the bathroom door and was about to leave when she remembered that this was the company and that there would be a meeting soon. She picked up her bag and put on some light makeup. After she was done, she turned to find that the tall and handsome man was leaning against the door frame. His deep, black eyes were focused on her for a long time. Her hand that was applying lipstick almost went crooked. She hurriedly wiped it twice before putting it down. She coughed dryly. "Why are you looking at me like that?" The man watched her, speaking softly. "Actually, waking up together like this every day, washing up, and standing by the side to watch you put on makeup is also a form of enjoyment." Jean Wan, was this man saying sweet nothings to her? When they went to eat breakfast, Jean Wan was dressed in the formal attire she had prepared for the meeting. However, she was afraid that the fragrance of breakfast would spread to her body, so she put on a light blue jacket. The man was usually exceptionally patient with her. Today, he was even more patient. Chapter 667. Mo Jingshan was clearly pleased by her obediently allowing him to lead her out of the office. However, after leaving the office, Jean Wan's face immediately became thin. It was almost time for work. There were many people in the company. Even if they entered the CEO's exclusive elevator, there would still be many people in the lobby on the first floor. But at this time, even if she wanted him to let go of her hand, this man clearly had no intention of letting go. Thus, early in the morning, the CEO of Shine Group, Mo Jingshan, and the CEO of MN Group, Jean Wan, suddenly appeared at MN Group. The cold and noble man and the elegant and beautiful woman walking together were destined to be a very eye-catching scene in front of the company. Fortunately, Mo Jingshan had long announced their relationship in front of the media. Even if the group of employees in the company was curious about the gossip, they knew they were husband and wife. No matter how much gossip there was, they could not spread it. When they walked out of the company, Mo Jingshan's hand touched a few of her fingers. Although Jean Wan liked the silver ornaments she bought in G City last time, she only wore them occasionally. They were not suitable for daily wear. After all, these small ornaments that were similar to art could easily scratch her clothes. Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes to look at her hands. They were clean. Regardless of whether it was her wrists or fingers, she was not wearing anything. He calmly asked, "The blue diamond I gave you, did you leave it at home and treat it as trash? I've never even seen you wear it out." "Trash?" Jean Wan said, "I wore it once at a banquet, but the 10-carat blue diamond was too eye-catching, so I didn't usually wear it. I gave you that blue diamond so that you could hide it at home. Otherwise, you can either use it to embed on a ring and make it into a suitable wedding ring for you, or you can buy a new one." Jean Wan, when they were together, Mo Jingshan rarely bought gifts, but this man seemed to be keen on buying gifts for her now. Or, he was keen on letting her wear his ring. The breakfast shop downstairs of the company was also very close. After a simple breakfast, Jean Wan hurried back to the company because the meeting was about to start at 8 o'clock. Mo Jingshan looked at the empty bowl opposite him and stood there, not in a hurry to leave. The waiter of the breakfast shop came to take away Jean Wan's bowl and chopsticks. At this moment, Mo Jingshan's cell phone on the table suddenly vibrated. He glanced at the caller ID and picked up the phone. "President Mo, something happened." His eyebrows didn't move as he calmly said, "I already know. The afternoon flight back to America. If there's anything, go find Nanheng first." After that, it was unknown what was said on the phone. Mo Jingshan was silent for a moment before asking, "Have you found the person?" "I found him. It's Akib's younger brother. He's been planning for 3 years to avenge his brother." The remaining members of the Cambodian gang were not in Los Angeles or China, so they couldn't be completely wiped out. The remaining members are all together now. In the past 3 years, they've made connections in America and bought people from various places. To be able to make connections in America, it can be seen that Akib's younger brother is more capable than his elder brother. Yes, now the underground people in America dare not provoke them directly. By the way, CEO Mo, there's another thing, speak. A few days ago, we found Shi Nianj in Washington, who has been missing for a year. Shall we inform Dr. Qin? Mo Jingshan said mildly, "The people he sent have already found them. There's no difference whether we inform them or not. This is their own problem. There's no need to interfere. I'll give him a call before I leave. Okay, I understand. After hanging up the phone, Mo Jingshan threw the phone aside, looked at the untouched wonton in front of him, remembered Jean Wan's satisfied look when she ate the bowl of wonton, and picked up the chopsticks to eat carelessly. It had been 2 days since Mo Jingshan returned to America. Jean Wan's working state seemed the same these days, but only she knew how absent-minded she was. After 2 days, she couldn't help removing Mo Jingshan's WeChat from the blacklist. She was about to ask him how he was doing after returning to America, but when she clicked on his profile picture, she found that Mo Jingshan's WeChat profile picture had been changed. But the picture he changed was, it turned out that when he held her to sleep in her office break room that night, she leaned against his arms in a deep sleep, and he took a picture of her face. At the time, she was in such a deep sleep that she didn't notice that the man had actually taken a photo of her sleeping. In the photo, she was clearly sleeping, leaning against his chest, and the man's handsome chin was in the photo. Although it was only a part of his chin, any acquaintance would be able to tell that it was Mo Jingshan at a glance. She was really convinced that he changed the picture of her and the scenery outside the car window and replaced it with a picture of him sleeping with her in his arms. She really wanted to throw him back into the blacklist. Jean Wan's temples throbbed. She resisted the urge to shove him back into the blacklist and sent him a WeChat message. She originally wanted to say hello, but in the end, it became, "You took a picture of me while I was sleeping. Why didn't I know you had this kind of hobby before? How dare you use it as your profile picture? If you don't change it, you'll stay in the blacklist forever." After sending the message, half an hour passed, but she still didn't receive a reply. Did Jean Wan think that he might not receive the message after she pulled him out of the blacklist? Or was there something wrong? Chapter 668. 2 days later, Jean Wan sent the message. Mo Jingshan still did not give her any reply. He did not even give her a call. Jean Wan went to a nearby province for a business trip and was about to return to the company when she suddenly received a call from Xiao Lui. An hour later, Jean Wan stood outside the French restaurant near the company, looking at Xiao Zhenjuan who was sitting by the window of the restaurant and glancing at Xiao Lui who was standing by the car in the parking lot with one hand in his trouser pocket. She walked to the parking lot. Seeing her, Xiao Lui raised his eyebrows at her. "It's not that I don't want to let you go. It's just that my father hasn't been eating or sleeping well these days. He wants to see you but is afraid that you won't see him, so he asked me to find a way to ask you out. He wants to talk to you. When did you know I was your sister?" Jean Wan didn't say anything, but after all, Xiao Lui was good to her. She couldn't be hostile to him, so she asked him directly. Xiao Lui raised his eyebrows, put one hand in his trouser pocket and chuckled. "What do you think? Did you know I was your sister when you suddenly kidnapped me to the villa halfway up the mountain?" Xiao Lui looked at her for a moment and said, "It was just a guess. My father didn't know about your existence." Later, a relative of an old servant we hired, who used to work for the Ji family, accidentally mentioned these things. "My father became suspicious of your mother's marriage to the Ji family. After a series of investigations, he found out your birthday and suspected that you were not Ji Hongwen's biological daughter. However, even if you're really not from the Ji family, your relationship with me is at most that of a half-sister. I don't have any feelings for a sister like you who appeared out of thin air, but you happened to bump into my gun. When I was about to take Shi Nianj away, you saved the little beauty that I yearned for. Tell me, when I know that you might be my sister, what should I do?" Xiao Lui said as he took out a cigarette and put it in his mouth, but because Jean Wan was standing too close to him, he didn't light it. He just looked at her roguishly. "Although I'm really annoyed by you, I can't hurt you. At that time, I had no choice but to take you away and ask the servants in the mid-mountain villa to give us the few strands of hair you left on the bed. I took them to do a paternity test and confirmed that your surname should be Xiao. If Mo Jingshan hadn't appeared and taken you away after I investigated your background, I'm afraid I would have taken you back to the Xiao family at that time. Ashes to ashes, ashes to ashes." If I handed you over to my father, would have a lot of peace. So, when we were in Beijing, you helped me because I'm your sister? What else? With a cigarette in his mouth, Xiao Lui narrowed his eyes and said with a faint smile, "If you weren't my sister, why would I bother you? I've never been interested in women. If you weren't my sister, I wouldn't care if you were Jin Wan or Ji Leng. Even if you were swallowed by Rongcheng, I wouldn't say a word." Jin Wan. So, if I don't feel grateful to you, won't it be too much? Xiao Lui snorted. You don't have to be grateful. We'll be a family in the future. I'm your brother. Just do your duty as a sister. What's a sister's duty? For example, don't take Qin's sighting side when it comes to snatching women. I'm snatching sister-in-law for you. Can't you understand that? Jin Wan, then I'm afraid you'll be disappointed. Don't call me brother or sister. I don't intend to acknowledge your Xiao family at all, but for the sake that you once supported me, I'll do whatever I want with you. As for your father. Jin Wan paused and turned to look at Mr. Xiao in the dining room. Xiao Lui was not dissatisfied with Jin Wan's coldness. Xiao Lui wasn't dissatisfied with Jin Wan's coldness and just smiled indifferently. I understand. He was unkind to my mother, but he loved your mother deeply for so many years. He asked for it. If I weren't a son of the Xiao family, I wouldn't have stayed in China, but now I have the responsibility of the Xiao family, so I can only do my duty as an elder brother. As for the rest, I respect your choice. The reason why Jin Wan agreed to come today was that when she was in the Ji family, she had summed up her mother's life in a few words, and she was unwilling to accept it. Some things should be talked about face to face. After all, now was the time to be frank. Jin Wan turned into the dining room. Xiao Zhenjuan still remembered at the last time he invited Jin Wan out for dinner alone, Jin Wan's attitude was not very kind. This time, when they met again after her parentage was revealed, Jin Wan was so calm that Xiao Zhenjuan couldn't understand her. Mr. Xiao. Jin Wan sat down in front of him without greeting him, put her bag aside, and said flatly, I'm willing to come to see you because I gave birth to you, but that's all there is to our relationship. I hope you can understand that I'm the daughter of the Ji family. My surname is Ji. In addition, please don't disturb my father in the future. Please remember your vow not to offend the Ji family. Seeing Jin Wan straighten out her role and attitude as soon as she sat down, Xiao Zhenjuan didn't speak for a while, and Jin Wan didn't need to say more. I know you blame me, and I also know that your mother died because of severe depression, but just like Ji Hongwen said, if she didn't have this feeling for me, she wouldn't have struggled for so many years, and in the end, her body wouldn't have been ruined. Xiao Zhenjuan sighed softly. Your mother was as beautiful and outstanding as you are when she was young. She went to the United States to study on her own with a student loan and a scholarship. Coincidentally, it was the same American business school that Ji Hongwen and I studied in. Your mother and I met each other and fell in love with each other. It was a very romantic process, and we went through a lot of hardships, which made your mother and I even more loyal to you. However, decades ago, my father and grandfather were in charge of the Xiao family. They used all kinds of means to force me back to China. In order to ensure your mother's safety and that she could finish her studies in the United States safely, I had no choice but to marry another woman arranged by my family. Chapter 669. Jin Wan smiled coldly. What's the point of telling me this? You might as well tell my mother after you die. Xiao Zhenjuan nodded. Of course I'll tell her, but I don't know if she will give me this chance and listen to me. He sighed. Ai knows that there's something on my mind and has always been unwilling to completely take over Ling Xiao Group. If there's a day when I can completely let go and no longer have to be responsible for the family and the business, I will definitely go see your mother early. Jin Wan was still expressionless. She picked up a glass of water on the table coldly, took a sip, and then looked at Xiao Zhenjuan in front of her. Mr. Xiao, I'm not interested in when you want to die or when you plan to hand over the family business to Xiao Lui. It has nothing to do with me. Xiao Zhenjuan sighed with a smile. Before I met you this time, I had drawn up a contract to change the company's property rights. The Ling Xiao Group, including half of the Xiao family's property, will be transferred to your name. Yi has no objection to this. As long as you sign it, half of the Xiao family's property will be yours. Jin Wan immediately smiled and gently played with the glass of water in front of her. Do you think I lack money? Of course not. Not to mention that the Ji family and the Mo family are your biggest backers. Even the MN group under your name is now a force to be reckoned with among Chinese enterprises, but what's yours is yours. I've owed you and your mother for so many years and didn't even know of your existence for more than 20 years. I'm just trying to make up for what I owe you. Although I know you won't appreciate it, the contract to change the property rights has been set. This is my kind intention. Jin Wan still just smiled coldly. She couldn't accept his kind intention. I know you have deep feelings for the Ji family. I won't force you to break up with Ji Hongwen, but Wan, I hope you won't only listen to one side of the story. If your mother hadn't been ill, she would never have married Ji Hongwen. She has always been very rational. How could she get pregnant and marry another man just because she lost control of her emotions? Xiao Zhenjuan looked at her face and said, she had encountered too many things since she was young. I believe that when you returned to Ji City, you already understood some of the situation. I also went to Ji City before and found out about the things that she didn't even know until her death. Later on, I specially investigated your mother's background, but her family had already left the country decades ago. In the vast sea of people, no matter how much money and power one had, it was impossible to find her real relatives. Moreover, she had already passed away, so there was no way to find someone to verify her blood relationship. Ji Hongwen and I kept saying that we loved her, but in fact, we didn't even do the most basic thing for her. Back then, when she broke down emotionally, Ji Hongwen took her away. He could have used any other method to help her, but in the end, he chose to marry her. If you were your mother, would you have married him in that situation? Jin Wan's hand remained on the cup and did not move. She only raised her eyes to look at Xiao Zhenjuan. Back then, even I was deceived by Ji Hongwen. I thought that your mother was using this method to sever all ties with me. But recently, I found out that back then, your mother suffered from a very serious depression and even developed into intermittent hysteria. It was normal when she didn't have an attack, but when it did, she became unconscious. I think that back then, when she married Ji Hongwen, it was during the period when she had an attack. She mistook Ji Hongwen for me. She did hate me, but it was undeniable that she loved me. So if she had been sober, she would never have married into the Ji family. Jin Wan did have some impression of what Xiao Zhenjuan said. But the impression was not too deep. She only remembered that her mother was very gentle and never hit or scolded them. However, she would often hold her and sit by the Ji family's window in a daze, looking in a direction that she did not know. There were several times when she smashed things in the room, but Ji Hongwen refused to let her and Ji Mengran in. He only said that her mother was sick and not feeling well. Then, he took her abroad to recuperate and only returned 2 months later. In Jin Wan's memory, this happened at least twice. When depression developed to the stage of hysteria, it was a sign of neurasthenia and mental disorder. Ji Hongwen didn't want you to acknowledge me. Although you and your mother are indebted to him, he is also sanctimonious and doesn't want to admit his selfishness. If he hadn't taken your mother away and completely severed all ties with me, if he had been willing to give your mother a chance to explain herself to me, everything would not have developed to this point. Xiao Zhenjuan's expression was very serious. Back then, we were both at fault. I can't absolve myself from the blame for your mother's depression. However, Ji Hongwen used his so-called tolerance and love to keep your mother by his side for the next few years. It was also unfair to her. Back then, when we were studying in America, Ji Hongwen pursued your mother bitterly but failed. In the end, he had no choice but to give up. But in the end, My marriage and the love and hatred that developed between me and your mother allowed him to take advantage of this loophole. Nguyen Nguyen, I'm telling you all this today, not to force you to do anything to Ji Hongwen, nor to force you to return to the Shao family. But since you already know the truth, I should explain everything clearly to you. I can't let you be biased. As your real father, I don't want to be a rapist and victim to be despised by you. Back then, when Qing Lin gave birth to you and left me with a memory, I'm also very gratified. I want to transfer half of the Shao family's assets to your name because I don't want to mistreat you, not because of my responsibility as a father. I don't want a single cent of the Shao family's assets. You should take it back. After hearing this, Jin Wan remained expressionless. Her eyes were calm. Xiao Zhenjuan looked at her. You still can't understand us, can you? At your age, perhaps you don't understand what fate is, but right now, I deeply understand it. The relationship between me, your mother, and Ji Hongwen is fate. There's nothing wrong with fate. What's wrong is my selfishness and my refusal to take that step forward. Back then, when I heard that your mother married into the Ji family, if I hadn't refused to see her because of my pride and temper, things wouldn't have turned out this way. Things like fate should be cherished, and it's time to cherish it. If you don't take that step forward, when you truly regret it, it will be too late. Chapter 670. After leaving the restaurant, Jin Wan drove away alone. Instead of going back to the company, she parked the car on the deserted side of the road and got out of the car when she passed the seaside on Binhai Road. Facing the boundless sea, he took off his shoes and walked back and forth on the soft sand barefoot. He looked at the footprints he had left all the way. He walked back and forth like this for a long time. When he looked back, he found that the footprints he had walked on before had been smoothed out by the waves, leaving no trace. She walked back and forth on the beach alone for a long time. When the evening was over and the sky was getting dark, she sat down on the beach and took out her cell phone to take a look. Mo Jingshan didn't reply. Although she had found the answer to the question of her own birth, everything was as she had expected. No matter what kind of hatred the older generation had, she did not have the right to hate on behalf of her mother. Her only right was to accept it or not. The reason why she went to see Mr. Xiao today was that she didn't hate him. She just didn't accept what the Xiao family gave her now. But there was an unspeakable feeling in her heart that she couldn't release, and she didn't know how to get rid of it. After driving here, she wanted to be alone for a while, only to find that the car that had been quietly following her a while ago was parked on the road near Binhai Road. Although it was quiet and the place where the car was parked was very hidden, Jin Wan had already found it. Wherever she went, the car followed. When she stopped, the car also stopped, always following her at a distance. After observing for a few days, Jin Wan was sure that the person in the car didn't mean to do anything to her. She guessed that this might be the bodyguard Mo Jingshan had arranged for her. He wouldn't affect her work and life, but he would be there when she needed him. Just like Mo Jingshan, he was the same now. He didn't interfere in her affairs, didn't break her wings that she had grown with difficulty, and didn't affect her work and life, but he would always be there when she needed him. But after returning to the United States, he hadn't contacted her for several days and didn't even reply to her messages. Jin Wan was now sitting on the beach staring at her cell phone, lost in thought. She didn't know whether it was because of what Mr. Xiao said today or because of the man who hadn't replied to her. Didn't he say he would return to High City after returning to the United States? Didn't he ask her if she wanted to go back to the Yew Garden with him? In the end, after returning to the United States, he didn't even reply to my messages, not even a call. Before this man left, he came to her company and did this to her in her office. Before they went to bed, he said sweet nothings about eating, going to the Yew Garden, and going back to High City to coax her. In the end, he pulled up his pants, turned around, and ignored her. Jin Wan resisted the urge to pull him back into the blacklist. She told herself that even if she pulled him back into the blacklist, she would not be able to appease her anger. Furthermore, such childish behavior was enough once. There was no need to do it again. However, her fingers still tapped on the phone screen a few times. In the end, she resisted the urge to turn off the phone screen and stood up. Barefooted, she picked up her shoes and walked back to Binhai Road from the beach. As usual, there were very few cars on this road. She sat there for nearly 2 hours and only heard 3 or 4 cars passing by. After cleaning up the fine sand under her feet and putting on her shoes again, Jean Wan did not go back to her car. Instead, she turned to look at the black car parked not far away and walked over step by step in her high heels. Seeing that she was looking in this direction and coming over with a clear goal, the people in the car did not avoid her. She knocked on the car window from outside and slowly rolled down, revealing the faces of 2 strange men. "Miss G, what can I do for you?" The people in the car asked her politely and respectfully. Jean Wan pursed her lips. "Who sent you to follow me?" "CEOMO, sure enough, as she expected." "He sent you to protect me at home?" "Yes, since Miss G returned to High City from London, we have been following you. CEOMO told us not to show up and not to affect your normal life, so we usually follow you very carefully." Jean Wan looked at them with her arms crossed and did not speak. The 2 men continued, "But there are some places that we can't enter without Miss G's permission. For example, the charity banquet hosted by the city last time. Because it was hosted by the city's leaders, there were too many security guards. We didn't have an invitation, and we didn't come with you, so we weren't allowed to enter." Jean Wan pondered for a moment. "Did he say anything else?" "CEOMO just asked us to follow you from a distance to ensure your safety. He didn't say anything else." "Did he tell you anything else before returning to the United States?" The 2 bodyguards looked at each other. Jean Wan sensitively noticed that when they answered this question, they hesitated for 2 seconds longer than before and then answered, "No." Jean Wan looked at them for a while, didn't ask any more, and turned to leave. After returning to her car, she threw her bag and cell phone into the passenger seat, looked at the street lights that turned on at 7:00 in the evening, and drove home. As the saying goes, the more you don't want to think about something, the more likely it will happen. On the 5th day after Mo Jingshan returned to the United States, an old client of the company, who had been working with him for more than 2 years, was going to Los Angeles to discuss a third-party project, which required MN Group staff to go with him. This client was very picky. He didn't even meet the vice president of the company and the public relations staff of other departments. He would only discuss any contract and project with Jean Wan in person. So this time, he invited Jean Wan to go with him to Los Angeles. The night before her departure, when Jean Wan returned to Yuehu Bay to pack her luggage, she picked up her cell phone and looked at Mo Jingshan's profile picture. After looking at it for a long time, she finally put down her cell phone and began to carefully pack her suitcase, preparing to leave for Los Angeles. Before leaving, Jean Wan took out the blue diamond hidden deep in the drawer. Instead of throwing it at home as a piece of junk as Mo Jingshan had said, she contacted a very well-known and authoritative jewelry customization center in China, sent the blue diamond to them, and asked them to make a simple and chic blue diamond necklace. It would take about 2 weeks to make the necklace, and she could pick it up soon after returning from the United States. Chapter 671. Los Angeles, USA. Mr. Mo, this is your cell phone number in China. It will take you a few days to get a new one in the United States. A middle-aged woman with blonde hair and blue eyes walked into the lounge and placed a light blue card on the table. Her Chinese was not very fluent. Mo Jingshan had just returned to Los Angeles a few days ago. Less than 1 kilometer from the airport, he was ambushed by Akib's brother and his accomplices. During this period, the people of 11 Base had taken precautions in advance. Although there were no other problems or casualties, Mo Jingshan's cell phone was left in the car before the car he was in spontaneously ignited, so his cell phone and the phone card he brought back were both destroyed. Jean Wan had registered a WeChat account for him with his cell phone number in China. It was impossible to get a new cell phone number in the United States in a few days, and Mo Jingshan had just left 11 base. When he got the phone card again, it was already the afternoon of the 6th day after he returned to the United States. Looking at the light blue card, Mo Jingshan picked it up casually. At the same time, a man in black came into the lounge. The moment the man saw him, he walked over respectfully and cautiously. He looked Chinese but spoke fluent English. "Mr. Mo, our boss is currently being held hostage by those people. They ask you to meet them at the appointed place alone, or they will kill him at any time." Seeing Mo Jingshan still holding the card without saying anything, the middle-aged woman with blonde hair and blue eyes knew that he had something to talk about. She quickly stepped forward to open a spare cell phone on the table, inserted the phone card for him, and respectfully put it back in his hand. The man who had just come in was still talking, but Mo Jingshan couldn't tell what his attitude was from his eyes, so he didn't dare to speak for a while. Mo Jingshan casually turned on the cell phone he had just inserted the phone card into. Before he opened WeChat, another cell phone he often used in the United States rang. "CEO Mo, Miss G is going to the United States with a partner to discuss a third-party project. The destination is Los Angeles. Shall we stay in High City or go to Los Angeles?" Mo Jingshan's eyes darkened. He glanced at the other phone, asking mildly, "Has she already boarded the plane?" "Yes, she just boarded the plane. We've checked everything. This flight is very safe, and there are no problems. However, High City is within the country after all, and the safety factor is much higher than overseas. She's going to Los Angeles this time purely for a project cooperation, but once she steps into the United States, we're afraid that those people lurking in the dark will shift their target to her." Mo Jingshan didn't expect that Jean Wan would suddenly have a project in Los Angeles. This time, the Cambodian remnants' revenge operation involved both Los Angeles and Cambodia, and they didn't dare to extend their hands so far in China. However, as soon as Jean Wan stepped into Los Angeles, all the precautions he had arranged around her in High City would be useless. "Send me her flight number and landing time." "All right." A few minutes later, Mo Jingshan hung up the phone and logged into the WeChat account that Jean Wan had helped him with on another phone. He immediately saw 2 messages she had sent him a few days ago. But the time shown was already a few days ago. Jean Wan took a nap on the plane. When she woke up, it was still 2 hours before they landed in Los Angeles. She got up, went to the first-class bathroom to wash her face, and then returned to her seat to chat with her business partner. 2 hours passed quickly. After flying all night, they finally landed at about 8:10 in the morning. Her business partner's client had arranged for someone to pick them up, but when Jean Wan walked out of the airport lobby while talking and laughing with her business partner, she saw a black SUV and Mo Jingshan standing beside it. At first glance, she saw the man dressed in a black t-shirt and trousers, and then she saw him standing by the car door with one hand in his trouser pocket. It seemed that he had been waiting for a while. It took her a long time to come back to her senses. She took a look at the time, then at the other cars parked outside the airport lobby, and then at the handsome man next to the black SUV. "Your friend is here to pick you up." The business partner walking with Jean Wan understood her look and asked with a smile. Jean Wan came back to herself and nodded at the business partner. They came here to talk about cooperation with a third-party company, but they didn't have to travel together. Seeing Jean Wan was picked up, the business partner greeted Mo Jingshan politely. For some reason, he felt that Mo Jingshan seemed familiar, but today Mo Jingshan was not wearing a suit, and this business partner was a foreigner, so he was not sure who he was. After greeting him and nodding, he got into his own car and left. Jean Wan still stood there, looking in Mo Jingshan's direction. It was not until the man standing by the car smiled at her that she came back to herself and walked over with her small suitcase. "It's rare for CEO Mo to take time out of his busy schedule to pick me up. You don't even have time to make a phone call or reply to a message, but you still have time to come to the airport in person?" Jean Wan didn't ask too much. She just looked at the t-shirt he was wearing and felt that although he was very handsome, he was obviously not from the company. After all, he rarely dressed so casually in the company. You don't want to pick you up in person? Don't you want to take advantage of me? The man gave a faint smile. Jean Wan chuckled. The question is, how did you know I would come to Los Angeles today? At the same time, without waiting for the man to answer, she immediately moved her eyebrows. Oh yes, I almost forgot, the bodyguards you arranged around me are also equivalent to spies. I have a little movement you can know. The man didn't refute and just took her small suitcase. Get in the car. Jean Wan looked at him again, thought for a while, and explained, I'm here to see a client. The bodyguards should have told you that I'm just here to talk about a third-party contract. I'll be back in 2 or 3 days. Okay. The man lowered his eyes, put her suitcase into the car, opened the door, and said again in a low voice, get in the car first. Jean Wan hesitated, walked to the car door, and insisted, so don't get me wrong. I'm not here to see you. Chapter 672. I haven't asked you anything yet. Why do you keep explaining? The man leaned down and gradually approached her with a deep smile in his eyes. Are you trying to hide something? Jean Wan, she turned her head. Although I'm here for work, CEO Mo is so busy that he doesn't even reply to my messages, so I came here to see how busy you are. Mo Jingshan chuckled and gently stroked her head. A few days ago, I accidentally lost my cell phone in China, so I couldn't get a new number card. I couldn't log into other numbers, so I didn't see it. I didn't get it back until this morning. Jean Wan couldn't help looking at him. You actually lost something? Did someone steal your phone or did you accidentally drop it somewhere? The man didn't answer but said slowly in a low voice, when will you start working? I'll send someone to accompany you. It's not safe in Los Angeles these days, so I'll send 2 people from Nan Heng's place to accompany you. Jean Wan thought he meant it wasn't safe because she had seen it on the international news a few days ago. It was said that recently in Los Angeles, there had been some gangs and gangsters causing trouble. There were frequent confrontations between the police and those people. This matter had already been reported on the international news for several days. Usually, similar situations would also occur in other cities in America. She was already used to it. He wanted to arrange people from 11 Base to accompany her, so she didn't refuse. She just nodded and said, don't trouble them too much. I heard that Fong Ling hasn't been in Los Angeles for a long time. Otherwise, I would have met her. Speaking of this, Jean Wan remembered something and said, before I came, I booked a hotel in the downtown business district. Check out of the hotel. With that, the man closed the car door for her. Jean Wan took a look at the time. When the man walked around the car and got into the car, she turned to look at the man who sat in the driver's seat. The hotel is very close to the place where I'm negotiating with my partners. Then check out of the hotel and live at my place. Jean Wan couldn't explain her feelings, but she felt that the man's attitude was particularly firm today. For example, he suddenly came to pick her up, arranged for someone to accompany her, and asked her to stay at his place. Los Angeles was very big. If she didn't stay in a hotel, she would have to take a detour to discuss the project. However, since he said that he would arrange people around her, she couldn't make them go to the hotel to find her. After thinking about it, she didn't say anything more. This time, I came to the United States to find a third party to cooperate with. I heard that the other party is a very punctual person. It's best to arrive in advance at the agreed time. It'd be best if the person you plan to put with me has a car. If not, I'll book a car in advance and ask someone to drive over. I'll arrange everything for you. Don't worry, just follow me. Where are you going with me? Your company? The Mo family in Los Angeles? Or your apartment in Los Angeles? It's a hotel too. Jean Wan immediately turned to look at the man's handsome side profile as he drove. Hotel? Why have you been staying in a hotel since you returned to the United States? The man didn't explain but said indifferently, I have some temporary arrangements. The hotel is not far from the city center, but it can guarantee that you will be sent there on time before you meet the partner. Don't worry, N. Logically speaking, Mo Jingshan returned to the United States because of the company. He had a place to live in the company, and he should have a place to live near the company. Besides, the Mo family in Los Angeles was not far from the headquarters of the Shine Group, but he was staying in a hotel. Jean Wan didn't ask much. After a moment of confusion, she turned to look out of the window, saying, since it's a hotel, please arrange another room for me. Mo Jingshan didn't answer. When they drove to the airport freeway, there was a traffic jam at the intersection ahead because of the car accident. The man slowed down the car and stopped behind a car. Then he put his arm around her waist, brought her into his arms, and let her sit on his lap. This was the airport freeway. Even if there was a traffic jam, they might have to drive forward at any time. Jean Wan struggled, but the man held her waist. The man pressed his thin lips against her white, soft cheek and said hoarsely, it's rare for you to come to Los Angeles for a few days. Stay in front of me. Don't think about hiding too far away, and don't think about living in other rooms. There is enough office space and sleeping space in my suite. You're unhappy because I didn't reply to your message, which shows that you still care about me. Since you're here, there's no need to keep a distance. I didn't say to keep a distance, but we don't have to live together. Jean Wan tried to avoid him. Anyway, I don't want to live in your room. Besides, you have a job in the United States, and so do I. No matter how big the suite is, we can still hear each other's voices. If I suddenly appear on the screen when you are working through a video call, it doesn't seem good. Why not? Do you think there are still people who don't know that you are Mrs. Mo? After all, Mo Jingshan was the head of Shine Group. Even if it was news about him in China, it was likely that some media in the United States would also forward and expose it. Therefore, when Mo Jingshan said in front of the media that they were not divorced, many people in the United States probably knew about it, especially the people in his company. Mo Jingshan, I find that you are really a clear-headed, shrewd, and ruthless person. I admit that I'm clear-headed, but what do you mean by ruthless? The more clear-headed and calm a person is, the more ruthless he is, isn't he? Mo Jingshan, when have I ever been ruthless to you? The only time I treated you coldly was 3 years ago, and all of it was for your own good. He pressed his forehead against hers, and his masculine breath lingered in her nose, filling her sense of smell. Think about it. What have I done to you, N? No matter what, you should tell me, instead of doing it yourself. I'm not a child. I shouldn't be the last to know anything. Before coming to Los Angeles this time, Jean Wan had thought that she should put many things on the table and have a good talk with him. Just because I often bear the responsibility for you without you knowing, I am accused of being ruthless? Jean Wan reached out to push his arm. I didn't say it was a crime. I just suddenly thought of it, so I said it. We have to keep driving. Let go of me first. Sit on my lap. Don't twist around. It's easy for you to get into trouble like this. Jean Wan, how could he be so indecent in a traffic jam on the highway? If she went to live with him now, she would basically be a sheep walking into a tiger's mouth. At this time, the engines of the cars blocked in front of them had been restarted. It seemed that they had dispersed and were ready to drive again. Chapter 673. Mo Jingshan raised her chin with his fingers. Seeing that she was obviously going to talk to him but was holding back her anger, he chuckled. Let's talk when we get back. Don't lose your temper. Then let go of me first. After all, they were on the highway, so he didn't force her face. He just kissed her on the cheek, let go of her, and let her sit back in the passenger seat. They returned to the hotel Mo Jingshan mentioned. As expected, he didn't book another room for her. After entering his room, she found that it was a business suite of more than 200 square meters, which was basically as big as a normal 3-bedroom apartment. There was a large study, 2 large separate bedrooms, and a living room, which was enough for 2 people to live in. Even when he was working, Jean Wan wouldn't disturb him by making a phone call in the bedroom next door. After entering the room and sitting down, Jean Wan said, "This hotel seems to be very close to 11 base. What's going on? Did something happen to Nanhang? Otherwise, why didn't you live in the company but here?" Mo Jingshan asked the hotel staff to bring in a glass of juice, put the juice on the coffee table for her, and said indifferently, "Recently, there is indeed something that needs Nanhang's attention, but it's just a small matter. After dealing with it, he will go back to the company. You don't have to worry about it. Just focus on your work. Don't walk alone at any time." Jean Wan held the glass and looked at the pale green strange juice with fresh milk in it. With CEO Mo's ability, it must not be a small matter that hasn't been dealt with after so many days after returning to the United States. "You let me live here. Are you afraid that I will be in danger?" Besides, he had repeatedly told her not to walk alone and try not to leave his sight. And now it was so close to 11 base. If that was the case, some memories from 3 years ago suddenly leaped into her mind. For a moment, Jean Wan suddenly rejoiced that she had come to America. At least she could see him safe and sound in front of her, instead of leaving him in Cambodia like in the past. She almost couldn't see him for the rest of her life. Thinking of this, Jean Wan frowned. "Well, Shine Group is yours after all. You are the one in charge. Who can restrict your whereabouts? If there was anything urgent that your subordinates needed you to deal with, they would most likely fly to High City, but this time, you suddenly returned to Los Angeles without warning. Could it be that you didn't come back because of the company in the US, but because of something else?" Mo Jingshan looked at her for a moment and then smiled at her. "You really dare to think of anything. I can see how sensitive you are to Los Angeles. Don't change the subject." He smiled. "There are indeed some things that need to be dealt with, but it's not as serious as you think. As long as you settle the work here as soon as possible and return to High City safely in 2 or 3 days, you don't have to worry about anything else." Jean Wan glared at him. "What did I say after I got off the plane?" "Mo Jingshan, if there is anything, I hope you can tell me, instead of bearing it unilaterally. It's not a good feeling to be kept in the dark. If it happens again, I won't forgive you." Mo Jingshan unhurriedly put her small suitcase aside. "You didn't eat or sleep well on the plane. What do you want to eat now? I'll ask the hotel to make it for you. I'm talking to you nicely. Why do you act as if nothing happened? Mo Jingshan, are you breaking the rules? If I don't treat you nicely, I won't be surnamed." Mo Jingshan glanced at her. "What's the rule of the Cold War between us?" Jean Wan, she didn't want to have a Cold War. Before she came to the US, she had already ordered the blue diamond he gave her to have it custom-made. Although she was reluctant to admit it, she did want to solve the problem. After all, if they hadn't divorced, she couldn't always avoid it. Jean Wan thought for a while and said, "No matter why you came back to the US this time, even if you can't use your domestic number in WeChat, you should at least call me, but you didn't do anything, which means you didn't tell me something. But as soon as you heard the news that I came to the US, you went to pick me up, which means you care about my safety. Since I set foot on the land of Los Angeles, I have become one of your burdens again, but you don't want to affect my work, nor do you want to misunderstand my purpose of coming here, so you still don't say anything. So, Mo Jingshan, I said that you are always clear-headed and cold, and I didn't wrong you at all." The man interrupted her with a smile. "I'll only make you more worried. After all, you were terrified of Cambodia. If I told you, I'm afraid you would have flown to the US a few days ago. The only thing I miscalculated is that you have a job in Los Angeles recently." Jean Wan looked at him. "Cambodia?" "Yes. Haven't those people been wiped out by 11 base and the local police, including the police in the US? Akib has a younger brother who used to wander around Africa and war-torn countries. Over the years, the power he built up in the dark was no worse than his brother's. Back then, those arms dealers had a lot of connections with Akib's family. This involved a lot of people, causing Akib's younger brother to use the excuse of avenging his brother to sneak into Los Angeles to take away what his brother couldn't get from me. Jean Wan's eyes were calm, but her hands slowly clenched the cup. She didn't have a deep impression of what happened that year. After all, what happened in Cambodia at that time was a matter of life and death every minute and second. At that time, her only belief was to save Mo Jingshan, to give him food and water, and to keep him alive. She vaguely remembered hearing someone say that Akib and Dolly were trying to get some underground arms trading channels from Mo Jingshan's mouth. As long as Mo Jingshan gave in, they would gain billions of dollars of profits overnight. Underground businesses were often linked to all kinds of dirty or even illegal interests, but these interests were very huge. In this case, this so-called Akib's younger brother was after Mo Jingshan. So this is why you returned to the US this time? Mo Jingshan was calm. After knowing the truth, you began to worry? Chapter 674. Who liked to have a cold war with him? Most of the time, it was nothing more than unwillingness and pride. Someone knocked on the door to ask for Mo Jingshan. Seeing that he had gone out, Jean Wan packed her luggage in the room alone. Half an hour later, Mo Jingshan returned to the room, only to see that Jean Wan's luggage had been placed in one of the bedrooms, and Jean Wan had fallen asleep on the sofa because she had been on the plane for too long and had been waiting for him on the sofa for too long. Mo Jingshan bent down to pick up the phone she had dropped on the carpet. He picked her up and gently placed her on the bed. He pulled the covers over her and pushed the woman's hair away from the pillow. After watching her for a moment, he turned and walked out of the bedroom with long strides. In the living room of the hotel suite, Mo Jingshan opened the floor-to-ceiling window, walked to the European-style railing of the balcony, looked at the vast lawn, took out his vibrating cell phone, and picked it up deadpan. The other party's voice soon rang. CEO Mo, have you found it? Yes, I've found it. The so-called third party in Los Angeles who contacted MN Group is the head of a financial investment company bought by Akib's brother, Atuda. Their purpose is to lure Miss G to the United States without arousing her suspicion, because the third party they contacted has indeed maintained a long-term cooperative relationship with the head of that financial investment company and also has a cooperative relationship with MN Group, so it's reasonable to introduce a third party to them. They can't do anything in China, and they know that Miss G is your weakness. There's no other way to make her lower her guard except to lure her to Los Angeles through normal business negotiations. And they know that since you have returned to Los Angeles, Miss G will definitely come to Los Angeles because of this third-party cooperation. Mo Jingshan's eyes fell on the lawn in the distance, and there was coldness and sternness in his eyes. He put one hand on the railing of the balcony and said coldly, "Spread the news to her business partner that the financial investment company closed down a week ago, and all cooperation projects are in a shelved and buffer period. Anyone who participates in cooperation with them at this stage will definitely lose money. Tell him to give up the idea of discussing a third-party cooperation with Jean Wan. Let him come forward and interrupt this negotiation. Don't give them a chance to get close to Jean Wan." "All right." The man said coldly, "By the way, the financial company that has dealings with Atuda can really go bankrupt. It will never have the chance to establish itself in the financial investment industry again." "Understood. Then Miss G's special trip to the United States to cooperate with us has fallen through just like this?" Mo Jingshan placed one hand on the railing and casually tapped on it with his slender fingers. The cold wind blew toward the lawn in the distance. It doesn't matter if it's a financial investor or a business partner that has connections with MN Group. Find a company that will allow her to continue working with a third party. Don't let her make this trip in vain. After the discussion, send her back to High City immediately. The person on the other side of the phone said awkwardly, "Although it's easy to find a third-party company of the same level, I'm afraid we can't let Miss G return to High City after the discussion. After all, you're here. Whether she leaves or not, isn't it still up to you, CEO Mo?" "Really?" Mo Jingshan was unperturbed. Then I'll personally send her back to High City. Nanhang, and you can handle everything in Los Angeles. The person on the other side of the phone wanted to cry but had no tears. We'll find a way to make Miss G's work go smoothly and let her return to High City without worry. She won't stay in the United States for too long. Okay, go ahead. After hanging up the phone, Mo Jingshan took a look at the room where Jean Wan was sleeping. Atuda was too purposeful. In order to get the clues from him, he really wanted Jean Wan. Knowing that Jean Wan was in China and they couldn't do anything to her, they tried to lure her to the United States under the pretext of company cooperation. It didn't matter if he told her in advance how dangerous the situation was. At least in this case, she knew how to protect herself better. Jean Wan woke up after a while. After all, it was not dark yet. Just now, she suddenly fell asleep while waiting on the sofa. She got up to wash her face. When she came out, she found that the man was reading work emails on her computer. Mo Jingshan, MN Group and Shine Group are not the same company. Are you stealing business secrets by reading emails on my computer? Looking at the man's calm and composed back, Jean Wan walked over. Mo Jingshan casually clicked open another of her emails. Without turning his head, he gently and indifferently said, "If I didn't read your work emails, I wouldn't have known that those messy, weak, small companies are all eyeing MN Group. Right now, you're really a piece of fat meat in their mouths." Jean Wan. After all, MN Group has just moved back to China, and we can't miss many cooperation projects. Although I receive a lot of emails and messages from other companies, I can't cooperate with just anyone. I'm just spreading my net widely. Although MN Group has a good reputation in the Chinese community, compared with Shine, it's still not as good as Shine. I can't be like Shine, which doesn't even take a look at companies that are not strong enough. He smiled. Don't you want to sleep a little longer? Jean Wan walked over and saw that he had deleted the useless emails in her mailbox. In fact, several small companies in the United States had contacted her, but she had ignored them. She had planned to visit them in person after coming to the United States, but in the blink of an eye, they were deleted by Mo Jingshan. Jean Wan's cheeks immediately puffed up. She reached out to grab her computer. You can read them, but you actually deleted my emails. The man tilted his head to look at her. It's useless. There's no need to visit these small companies. You'd better stay here for the next few days and don't go anywhere. Don't contact these small companies. Jean Wan casually flipped through it and saw that he had deleted some emails, but they were indeed documents sent by small companies that even she didn't like and didn't need to see. She sat down by his side and casually clicked on the computer. Do you think you can erase the crime of stealing MN Group's business secrets by doing this? As the dignified CEO of Shine, you used my computer to read my company's emails. How on earth did you crack my computer password? He smiled. It's the same password as your phone. Do I need to crack it? Dash. Chapter 675. After a while, Jean Wan turned off the computer and said, Mo Jingshan. I'm still considering whether to meet the business partner I'm going to meet in the United States. I came here to talk to him, but after thinking about it carefully, I feel it's too much of a coincidence. I feel that the timing and reason of the financial company's olive branch to us are a bit far-fetched. But then Jean Wan said gloomily, but I'm already here. It's not appropriate for me to meet him. Mo Jingshan took a look at her and said with a smile, it's not too late for you to be vigilant. Jean Wan raised her eyebrows and looked at him. Is that company really related to Akib's brother? I was there when they were in Cambodia. If they investigate, they will definitely find me. They want to do something to me, don't they? At first, Jean Wan was wondering how Mo Jingshan was going to solve this problem, but she didn't think anything would happen. At most, he wouldn't be able to return to High City for the time being. However, when she slept just now, she dreamed of a lot of things that happened in Cambodia 3 years ago, and now she felt a little scared. She heard that Akib's brother lived in war-torn countries all year round. He was probably even more ruthless than his brother and would not give up until he achieved his goal. Then I don't have to meet the people of that company anymore. Jean Wan was silent for a moment and then said, in case something really happens. I've arranged another good company for you. The third-party cooperation that you want to expand with other partners in the same industry can be successfully negotiated. You can talk to the people and companies that I've arranged. As for the others, you don't have to touch them. Jean Wan raised her eyebrows. You arranged someone else for me? The man looked back, took the computer in her arms, and said lightly, I can't let you come here for nothing. What did he mean by coming here for nothing? This was because after she came out of the airport, she insisted that she only came to the United States to work, not to look for him. So even if there was a change in the work that was originally arranged, he could still let her continue to do it step by step. Was he personally laying a path for her to step down? Then I'll meet the partner you arranged. Based on Mo Jingshan's experience, the person he arranged would definitely be much more reliable than the person she was supposed to meet. Furthermore, the success rate of their discussion and cooperation would be much smoother. Okay, I'll give you their contact information later. Jean Wan had no objection and nodded. Mo Jingshan looked at the email on her computer again. Because of Jean Wan's trust and cooperation, as well as the fact that she obediently listened to his arrangements after learning of the danger, his lips curved into a smile. In the evening, they had dinner in the hotel. After Mo Jingshan talked with the people from 11 Base, Jean Wan followed him downstairs and the two had dinner together. The people from 11 Base still had an impression of Jean Wan, especially Kay and the others, who were very kind to her when they saw her and called her Mrs. Mo or sister-in-law. All this fate originated from the food Jean Wan cooked for them and the socks she washed for them in Cambodia. Speaking of which, she didn't know how Phong Ling and Nanhang were now. After Nanhang went to the UK to take Phong Ling away, Jean Wan had been busy with her career. She occasionally called Phong Ling, but Phong Ling didn't like to express her happiness or unhappiness to her good friends like Xia Tian, nor did she deliberately mention her relationship to ask her good friends for help. She never talked about herself. Phong Ling was quiet and feminine in front of Jean Wan, but most of the time, as Kay described, she was a very cold and very cool woman. She was good at fighting and fickle, but Nanhang was deeply poisoned by her and couldn't get rid of her no matter how hard he tried. However, when they had dinner in the evening, when the people from 11 Base saw Jean Wan sitting at the same table as Mo Jingshan, they all looked surprised. Oh, it turned out that Mrs. Mo and Mr. Mo were a family. It seemed that the divorce they had heard was false. As soon as this conclusion came out, these people called her Mrs. Mo and sister-in-law more affectionately. In fact, Jean Wan didn't know how to explain. After being called like this so many times, she simply didn't bother to explain. Anyway, they wouldn't listen to her even if she explained. The next day, before noon, the business partner Mo Jingshan arranged for her was already waiting at the appointed place. Jean Wan contacted her business partner who came to Los Angeles with her, and after setting the time, she was going to go there. Mo Jingshan couldn't leave, so he had 4 good men from 11 Base Drive to follow her. On the way, Jean Wan was still talking on the phone, when she suddenly saw the little brother who was driving look back through the rearview mirror and then speed up the car coldly. Jean Wan subconsciously looked back, only to find that several black cars had been following them for a while without her noticing. She put down the phone and asked, "Are they those people? Are they Akib's brother's men?" The driver didn't expect Jean Wan to know and immediately took a look at her through the rearview mirror. "Yes, that man's name is Atuda. He's very difficult to deal with. Mrs. Mo, sit tight. I'm probably going to start racing when we reach the road ahead." Jean Wan casually fastened the seatbelt on the back seat. "Okay, sit tight." The driver immediately stepped harder on the accelerator. When he turned into the road ahead where there were fewer cars, he accelerated the car to more than 200 kilometers per hour. It was indeed the kind of racing speed that could only be seen in movies. The passing buildings and scenery outside the car window flashed by so quickly that she couldn't see them clearly at all. Jean Wan kept looking ahead at the speed displayed on the driver's seat and didn't look nervous at all. She knew there would be no problem with the people sent by Mo Jingshan. After about 10 minutes, the cars behind them also accelerated. Although they didn't get rid of them, they at least kept a safe distance from them. If they wanted to shoot here, they wouldn't hit this car. It wasn't until the car gradually slowed down that Jean Wan took a look back, only to find that several SUVs had just rushed out of the intersection on both sides and successfully stopped the unknown cars behind them. A lot of people got out of the SUVs, and Jean Wan could tell from their clothes that they were from 11 Base. The car continued to move forward. After a while, the driver saw that Jean Wan's face didn't change, looked at her through the rearview mirror, and smiled. "Mrs. Mo, aren't you afraid?" Chapter 676. The driver immediately smiled and looked a little silly. "That's true. Mrs. Mo, don't worry. I promise I'll make sure you finish your work today. It doesn't matter whether you can finish it or not. Just be careful. If you can't finish it, you can go back, so as not to get involved in other trouble." Jean Wan didn't expect that those people would chase the car on the road, and now she didn't want to trouble them too much because of her work. "It's okay. Mr. Mo has arranged everything. It will be very safe all the way. We have people at the appointed place," the driver said, quickly turned to another intersection, and went straight in the direction of the destination. After arriving, Jean Wan didn't expect that the partner Mo Jingshan arranged for her was an old acquaintance she had met in England. At that time, the other party was passing by London, England, and she didn't have a better project to cooperate with him, so unfortunately, they didn't cooperate. Unexpectedly, Jean Wan's MN group had moved back to China. This company had a lot of projects in the United States and High City. As soon as he saw Jean Wan, he talked about his regrets in London. However, after 2 or 3 hours, Jean Wan not only successfully negotiated the contract and several cooperation plans, but also directly turned the third-party cooperation into a direct cooperation between the two parties. The other party also introduced other friends to cooperate with the third party. In short, she gained a lot and also made up for the regret that she failed to sign the project in London. Finally, before leaving, they chatted happily. When she returned to the car to go back, Jean Wan looked through the plan she had just drawn up together and recalled the scene when she sat together and talked with the several partners just now. It went so well, and it could be said that she had fulfilled a little wish when she was in London. She really wondered if there was anything that Mo Jingshan couldn't predict or do. He just wanted to help her find a partner so that she wouldn't come to Los Angeles in vain, but it turned out that everything was just what she wanted. Jean Wan was carefully reading the plan in her hand when the driver's cell phone rang. She raised her eyes and looked at the driver's seat. The other party put on the headset to answer the phone. She could only hear him calmly and solemnly respond, but she didn't know what he said, but then she noticed that the car had changed its direction. It took several strange roads and took a detour for about 20 minutes before it returned to the main road leading to the hotel near 11 Base. She guessed that she was probably being followed, but seeing that the driver was very calm, she continued to read the plan in her hand. After returning to the hotel, the bodyguards still followed her until they sent her back to her room and left 2 people to guard outside. Although no one clearly told her the seriousness of the situation, she could see the seriousness of the situation from the process of going out and coming back, as well as the situation of these people guarding and following her. She could see the seriousness of the situation. Jean Wan didn't come out after returning to her room, but she didn't see Mo Jingshan after coming back in the afternoon. Even when it was dark, Mo Jingshan still didn't come back. She took a shower and walked back and forth in the room. She didn't use a hairdryer to dry her hair, but when her hair dried naturally, it was already 11:00 at night in Los Angeles time, and Mo Jingshan still didn't come back. This suite was very large. Jean Wan looked at the time from time to time, then pushed open the floor-to-ceiling windows on the balcony and looked out. The lawn outside the hotel was also beautifully lit. The whole hotel was very luxurious and brightly lit. Because this place was in the suburbs, there were not many buildings in front of her, and all she could see were lawns or roads. But from this angle, she seemed to see the lights of Los Angeles in the distance. A familiar worry and anxiety troubled her. Just like when Mo Jingshan disappeared in Cambodia 3 years ago. She finally understood why Mo Jingshan asked her not to be guarded by the bodyguards he sent or to stay in front of him and not to leave his sight. Because in such a place, under such circumstances, she could only feel at ease when the person she cared about was in front of her. Jean Wan stood on the balcony for a while, but she didn't see Mo Jingshan's car coming back, so she turned back to the floor-to-ceiling windows. She really couldn't sleep, so she picked up the cooperation plan during the day and went into the study of the suite, planning to finish this part of the work before tomorrow morning. It was 12:00 at night, and the lights in the study were still on. Jean Wan had read the last few pages of the cooperation plan. When she turned back, she was about to get up and pour herself a glass of water when she suddenly saw a handsome and tall man standing in the shadow of the study door. Mo Jingshan put one hand in the trouser pocket of his trousers and leaned his tall body slightly against the wall by the door. His handsome face was hidden in the darkness of the study, but she could still see his incomparably cold outline. He was looking at her as if he had been standing there watching her since he came back. Jean Wan paused and suddenly looked at the time. It was already past 12:00 at night. She had been waiting for him to come back, but she was so focused on her work that she didn't even notice when he entered the room. But she noticed that Mo Jingshan was wearing a suit today instead of the t-shirt he wore yesterday, so she subconsciously asked, "Did you go to the company today?" And the man still stood there and looked at her with a faint smile. "Have you finished your work?" "It's just a cooperation plan. I can finish it after I return to High City. There's no hurry. I just couldn't sleep, so I opened it to have a look," Jean Wan said as she walked out. When she came to Mo Jingshan's side, she wanted to brush past him, but she suddenly stopped and turned to look at the man who had been leaning against the wall indifferently and looking at her deeply. Why did you come back so late today? Did something happen?" The man's elegant and deep brows moved slightly. "Are you concerned about me?" Jean Wan didn't hesitate and answered, "I can't really be an ingrate." Mo Jingshan looked at her, and the slight smile on his lips couldn't hide his elegance and indifference. "The company had some temporary arrangements today. I went back to the company to deal with some things and went to a dinner party in the evening, so I came back a little late. Couldn't you send me a message or call me in advance if you had a dinner party?" Chapter 677. Mo Jingshan saw that although the little woman did not say anything, it was clear from her eyes that she had been worried all night. Just as Jean Wan was about to walk past him, Mo Jingshan held her waist and pulled her into his arms. Being pressed by his arm, Jean Wan was suddenly pressed against the wall, and she was pressed against him tightly. She rushed to step back, but the man held her waist and refused to let go. At the same time, he chuckled lowly, "I thought you didn't care, so I didn't say anything, lest you rebuke me if I did." The man who had the ability to control the trajectory of her life was now trying to play the trick of suffering in front of her. Did he think she didn't care? She really didn't care. She didn't care at all. But no matter how she struggled, she couldn't break free. The man held her and seemed to be very satisfied with her embarrassed look. He bent down and kissed her cheek. As if it was not enough, he kissed her again. When Jean Wan was so angry that she wanted to bite him, the man smiled and kissed her hairline when she lowered her head. Jean Wan trembled all over and glared at him. "Mo Jingshan, admit it, Mrs. Mo, you still love me." Jean Wan put on a straight face. "Who wants to talk about love with you? Haven't you already arranged a plane ticket back to High City for me tomorrow?" "I'll go back tomorrow. I don't care if you live or die in the United States." The man chuckled. "Going back to High City as soon as possible will make me feel more at ease." Los Angeles is not suitable for you recently. If you want to come back later, I'll take you here in person, en? Who cared? Jean Wan twisted again but still couldn't move away. The man leaned against the wall and held her in his arms. He looked pleased and content, imprisoning her in his arms as if it didn't take him any effort at all. She struggled for a while, but in the end, she had no choice but to lean into his arms. Looking at the man's face so close to hers and the gratified and satisfied smile in his eyes, her heart moved slightly. In the end, she gradually calmed down and allowed him to hold her. After a long while, she blurted out, "Do I have to go back to High City tomorrow?" The man's low, magnetic voice was right by her ear. "Why? You can't bear to go back? Knowing that you're not safe in Los Angeles, I'm afraid I won't be able to feel at ease if I leave alone." However, she hadn't been able to sleep well since he hadn't returned for a few hours. If she didn't receive any news from him after returning to High City, she might not be able to stay in High City anymore. She might find a way to fly over at any time. But she knew that she couldn't do anything here. She was involved in different fields from 11 Base and Nanhang, so even if she stayed, it seemed that she could only be protected by his people. Not only would she take up their manpower, but she might also be a burden to him. Returning to Sea City was indeed the most reassuring and least burdensome way for him. But after returning, what if he didn't reply when she sent him another message or didn't pick up the call? What should she do? He was afraid that he would be unable to control his imagination. "As long as you return to High City obediently, I promise that I'll be back safe and sound within half a month." The man patted her back. "Trust me." Of course, Jean Wan believed him, but she didn't expect these things before coming to Los Angeles. Now, according to the original plan, she would return to High City in 2 or 3 days, but now she suddenly didn't want to leave. But she had to go. She lowered her head, no longer retreating or struggling, but rested her head on the man's shoulder and said with her eyes closed, "Mo Jingshan, in fact, there's nothing wrong with sharing joys and sorrows. You don't have to always protect me behind you. I can do a lot of things for you, but the one thing I don't want is to become your weakness." But she knew that she was still his weakness. So no matter what, he had to take her back to a safe place and not allow her to step into danger. Mo Jingshan almost unconsciously raised his hand and placed it on her head. After holding her for a long time, he pressed his lips against her hair to ask softly, 3 years ago, when I woke up in the Los Angeles hospital, I read the dozens of messages you sent me. Jean Wan didn't speak but closed her eyes. One of the messages said that you loved me. Mo Jingshan's voice was very low and light, and his tone was a bit profound. "So, take back your words that you don't love me anymore. You are mine, and your heart can only be mine. Don't run too far away. Come back when you have to, en?" Jean Wan still didn't speak. The assistant by your side, Xiao Ba, said that in your first year in London, you would often run to open the door when you heard movements outside. You would then stare blankly at the empty space outside. Mo Jingshan asked softly, "Were you waiting for me?" Mo Jingshan had thought that Jean Wan would hate him, blame him, and perhaps never forgive him. But since he learned what happened to her in the first year she arrived in London, he was completely relieved. No matter how heartless her words were, or how serious and cold she pretended to be, he didn't believe that she really didn't love him when she said she didn't love him anymore. Jean Wan didn't speak, just being held by the man for a long time. She suddenly took a deep breath, buried her head in his arms, and whispered, "Mo Jingshan, after returning to High City, let's go back to the U Garden. I want to see what the U Garden looks like after you refurbished it." "All right." The next morning, Jean Wan was sent to the airport on time, ready to return to High City. Mo Jingshan sent the little brother who drove yesterday to see her off, and 2 bodyguards followed her at the airport. After passing the security check and entering the departure hall, Jean Wan learned that the little brother who drove the car would accompany her back to High City and would not leave until he was sure she was safely back in High City. The other 2 bodyguards didn't follow her in but waited outside the security check, waiting for her plane to take off. In the first-class waiting room, the little brother had been standing by her side obediently and had never left. All the people passing by or pedestrians she saw were ordinary people who were carrying suitcases and preparing to go out on the same flight, so the safety factor was very high. She didn't see Atuda's men even when she boarded the plane. Jinwan didn't have much luggage, but after all, there was a laptop in it, so it was a little heavy. When she boarded the plane, the little brother walked in front of her, ready to help her put her luggage in first, and Jinwan followed him. Behind her, the people who were also boarding the plane were lining up in order. After boarding the plane, Jinwan saw that the first-class bathroom was not closed. She happened to accidentally spill juice on her hand in the departure lounge, so she turned to go in and wash her hands before going back to sit down. As soon as she stepped into the bathroom in this cabin, the door behind her was suddenly closed. It was not spacious here, and Jinwan found that there was a person in this narrow space. She raised her eyes abruptly. Chapter 678. The black SUV sped on the road. At this time, Jinwan should have boarded the plane and would arrive in High City at night. He didn't have time to go to the airport in person for the first hour. He had just received news from Nanhang that the partner of Shine Group who had been kidnapped by Atuda for 2 days had been successfully rescued. Mo Jingshan hurried to the airport. Even though he knew that she had boarded the plane, Los Angeles was different from other places. Anything could happen here. He couldn't rest assured until he confirmed that she had boarded the plane with his own eyes and that the plane had taken off. As the black SUV sped on, his cell phone suddenly rang. He glanced at the number on the screen and suddenly felt uneasy. His usually restrained calmness was suddenly affected by unknown turbulence. He picked up the phone and listened to the urgent report from the man who had been sent to escort Jinwan back to High City. The black SUV continued to move forward. Mo Jingshan slowed down the car, held the steering wheel with one hand, and dialed Jinwan's number with the other. However, her cell phone was turned off. Her cell phone was fully charged before she boarded the plane. It couldn't be out of battery now. He called her again, but her cell phone was still turned off. Mo Jingshan's eyes darkened. He was sure that Jinwan had suddenly disappeared a few minutes after boarding the plane. If Atuda had also planted spies among the staff of Los Angeles Airport, he was afraid that all the staff on the plane had been controlled. Mo Jingshan dialed Jinwan's number again and again, but her cell phone was turned off every time, which made his heart sink. The car sped up and sped toward the airport at a terrible speed. Finally, he arrived at the airport. However, when he got off the car, his cell phone suddenly rang. The moment he picked up the phone, Nanhang's voice rang. I don't know how Atuda got through to all the flights from Los Angeles to High City these days. They failed to find Jinwan's flight, but I'm afraid he has planted spies on all the flights these days, hiding in the cabins, ready to take Jinwan away at any time. They know that only Jinwan can threaten you, so they have no intention of letting her return to High City. I just got the news. Has Jinwan boarded the plane? Is it too late? When Mo Jingshan answered the phone, he saw the 3 bodyguards coming out of the airport but didn't see Jinwan. His rare fluke was instantly shattered by reality. It was a rare sandstorm in Los Angeles. The strong winds and the yellow soil that came from nowhere seemed to have dyed the whole world yellow. The weather was foggy, and the air pressure was low until the sky gradually darkened. The people they sent out didn't receive any news from Jinwan. Mo Jingshan stood by the window. The people behind him were all quiet. No one dared to say a word. They were all anxiously waiting for news from the others. Looking at the sky full of yellow sand, Mo Jingshan's heart seemed to be empty. His mind was filled with the image of Jinwan leaning softly in his arms last night. After 3 years, she finally softened her whole body and whispered in his arms that she would return to the U Garden after he returned to High City. Her eyes were filled with faint anticipation. Mr. Mo. Atuda's men are very secretive today. They know how important Mrs. Mo is. Now that they have succeeded, I'm afraid they are deliberately wasting our time and energy. Kay, who had just returned from outside, walked in quickly. Mo Jingshan dropped the cell phone in his hand and raised his hand to touch between his eyebrows, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't rub the deeper frown between his eyebrows. Suddenly, the cell phone he had just thrown on the table rang. The sudden noise made Mo Jingshan freeze. He turned to look at the number displayed on the screen. It was Jin Wan's cell phone number. Mo Jingshan's eyes darkened. He had guessed something. He picked up the cell phone and put it to his ear. Before the other party spoke, he said coldly, "Tell me your conditions. Don't hurt her." "Oh, Mr. Control, you're really smart. You haven't even heard my voice, but you've already guessed it." It was a similarly deep, cold, and slightly hoarse voice. There was a hint of the vicissitudes and profoundness that came from being stimulated by the smoke of gunpowder in the war-torn lands. Hearing that it was Atuda's voice, Mo Jingshan's face suddenly became much colder. For many days, it was his men who came out to do things. It was rare for him to do it in person, but he directly put his hands on Jin Wan. However, Atuda had always been ruthless, and those who were targeted by him wouldn't be treated well. "Atuda, this is Los Angeles, not your territory in Cambodia. I warn you not to act rashly. If my people lose even a hair, I'll let you know the price." Mo Jingshan held the phone deadpan and looked coldly at the yellow sand outside. "Of course I know this is Los Angeles. If it wasn't Los Angeles, do you think I would threaten you by kidnapping your woman?" The man on the other side of the phone sneered. As he spoke, he turned his eyes to Jin Wan, who was slowly waking up in a corner of the dark warehouse, and said coldly, "Oh, your woman has woken up. She's not bad. She's so beautiful that I'm surprised. I didn't expect that you had such a beautiful wife but didn't find her for 3 years. She appeared in Cambodia and even shot a keeb in the back, didn't she?" Mo Jingshan's face almost froze. "What did you do to her?" "It's nothing. It's just that before we took her away, we covered her mouth and nose with a drug in the toilet of the cabin, causing her to be unconscious until now. But she's awake now. She's opening her eyes. She's looking at me. Her eyes are filled with fear and confusion. Her expression is very surprised. She seems to be very afraid," the man on the other side of the phone said in a cold and gloomy voice. "Mr. Control, this woman is very important to you, isn't she?" The veins on Mo Jingshan's forehead bulged, and he suddenly looked back at the people behind him. Kay immediately asked someone to pick up the prepared computer and find the location of Jin Wan's cell phone signal with the help of the current call signal. However, after more than 10 seconds, the computer screen showed that he couldn't find her. You're tuning in to the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.